Hello everyone, thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't fallen asleep yet, you might as well listen to this story, and maybe you will fall asleep soon. Before listening, please like and subscribe first. Of course, the premise is that you really like my content. If you have any thoughts or feelings, please leave a message below. Your opinions will really help me grow. Okay, enough chit-chat. Let's get started. I was awakened by the vibration of my cell phone. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the emergency room was still filled with the smell of Lysol, and Ian's number was flashing on the screen, very dazzling. Claire, Selena insisted that I ask you to be the special guest. There was a smile in his voice. She said that you saved her Labrador in Alberta. This friendship is deeper than that of a bridesmaid. I stared at the red light in the emergency room, and my throat tightened. I just sent away a high school student who took sleeping pills last week, so I'm really not in the mood to attend the wedding of the century. But Leon added, the hotel is in the Rocky Mountains. Didn't you always say that you wanted to see the manor on a snowy night? I agreed for some reason. As a result, there was fog this morning, and the helicopter was delayed for 2 hours. When I pushed open the car door, laughter was coming from the carved iron gate of Hawk Manor. I ran towards the banquet hall on the snow. My skirt got caught on a bush and pulled my knee so hard I was still late. The crystal lamp swayed overhead, forming a golden mist. At the main table, Selena was holding a silver knife, and the champagne tower was piled up into a transparent pyramid beside her. She turned and smiled at me. A strand of the diamond veil slipped off, and the blue roses in her hair trembled slightly. Liam was standing on her left, wearing a neat suit, but when he saw me, he raised his eyebrows slightly. You are late. The voice was like a frozen needle, pricking my ears. Before I could apologize, the banquet hall suddenly became quiet. Selena's silver knife hit the third layer of wine glasses, making a crisp ding sound. She picked up the top champagne glass, and just as her fingertips touched the rim of the glass, she suddenly covered her mouth. Black blood oozed from between his fingers like melted tar. Selena, Leon reached out to support her, but as soon as his hand touched her wrist, he pulled it back as if he had been electrocuted. She fell backwards and the crystal glass shattered with a snap. When I rushed over, her pupils had already turned into blurry black dots. Her lips were black and blue, and the corpse spots on her neck were spreading at a speed visible to the naked eye. Typical symptoms of poisoning. Get out of the way. I pushed away the guests who gathered around me and knelt on the carpet. He pressed his fingers on the side of her neck, and his pulse was as thin as a thread. When I got closer, I could smell the smell of bitter almonds mixed with metallic flavor on her breath. The smell made the back of my neck feel cold. Was it aconitine poisoning? Call an ambulance. Someone shouted, the mountain road is closed. The butler's voice came from the door. The snowstorm has arrived early, and all vehicles are stuck 5 kilometers away. I looked up and saw that the snowflakes on the floor-to-ceiling windows were incredibly large, making dull sounds as they hit the glass. The heating in the banquet hall was on high, but I felt a chill running down my spine. Turn on the light. I pulled the tablecloth and put it under Serena's head. Isabel, get a wet towel. Mr. Edward, go to the kitchen to get emetics. No need. My hand stopped on Selena's wrist. Her skin had begun to turn cyanotic, and corpse spots had spread from her heart to her limbs. Combined with the room's temperature of 22 degrees, she should have died within 10 minutes. Aconitine takes 10 to 30 minutes to take effect after oral administration. In her case, it takes effect too quickly. Isabel's scream pierced her eardrums. The bridesmaid in a mint green dress slumped in her chair, scratching the tablecloth with her fingers. She was fine just now. Edward Vaughan stood at the end of the crowd, his back as straight as an iron rod. The mining magnate's face was as white as a sheet of paper, but his eyes were abnormally bright as he stared at the broken wine glass in Selena's hand. I followed his gaze. There was a complete piece of cup rim in the broken glass, which was reflecting unnatural light under the crystal chandelier, as if it was coated with a layer of transparent substance. Protect the scene. I pulled out a napkin to wrap my fingers and picked up the rim of the cup. Leon suddenly squatted down and brushed the back of my hand with the sleeve of his suit. Claire, you are a doctor. Can you confirm that it is poisoning? His voice was trembling, but his fingertips were steady. I noticed that he still had the wedding ring on his ring finger. The initials Serena were engraved on the inside, but there was a fresh scratch on it. I can't be sure yet. I avoided his gaze. But the police need to intervene. The police must at least wait until the snow stops. The butler stepped forward and said, Mr. Vaughan has had all exits blocked. Dr. Aiden, can you assist in the investigation? I took out the notepad I carried with me and turned the pen around my fingertips twice. The first line reads, Accompany, and the second line is contactees. Leon, exchanging rings. Isabel, adjusting veil. Edward, passing wine glass. Graham, adjusting lights. She touched your hand before she fell. I looked up at Leon. Did you have any physical contact when you were cutting the champagne tower? His Adam's apple moved. She touched the back of my hand and said, I have finally waited for this day. I drew a question mark on the note. At that time, Leon retracted his hand too quickly, as if he was hiding from something. There was a commotion in the banquet hall. When a guest took out his cell phone to take pictures, Edward sternly asked the bodyguard to take away all the electronic devices. Leon kept looking down at his phone, sliding his fingers quickly across the screen, as if he was deleting messages. I pretended to adjust Selena's veil and slowly moved to the place where he had just stood. There was a crumpled piece of paper on the carpet. I picked it up and pieced it together. It was half a note with "account cleared" written on it in blue ink. Dr. Aiden, Graham's voice came from behind. The hotel manager, wearing a dark gray uniform, held a tray in his hands. Would you like a hot drink? You don't look well. I stuffed the shredded paper into my sleeves. Thank you. Can I check the surveillance in the banquet hall? I need to confirm. The monitoring system is down. He smiled, the wrinkles at the end of his eyes like lines carved by a knife. There was a problem during the inspection this morning. The technical department said that we have to wait until the snow stops before we can repair it. I stared into his eyes. His tone was so natural, as if he had memorized the lines in advance. The snow fell heavier and heavier, and the sound of it hitting the glass was like someone knocking on a coffin. Selena's body was covered with a white cloth. Leon squatted beside her, his fingers unconsciously picking at the scratches on the inside of her wedding ring. Isabel was still crying. Edward stood by the window, his shadow stretched long by the snowlight, like a black sculpture. I looked down at the notepad and saw the last line reading, source of aconitine, laboratory. Hawk Manor was once the private residence of a mining tycoon. It is rumored that there is an abandoned laboratory in the attic. This is what Leon said when he was drinking last time. Suddenly, a white light flashed outside the window. It was lightning. I shuddered and stuffed the pad into my bag. I am destined to be sleepless tonight, and I have to find out the truth about the poisoned wine before the blizzard stops. I was staring in the direction of Luan's phone when Graham came over with the hot cocoa. His fingers were still sliding, and the blue light from the screen made his eye sockets turn blue. The half piece of paper that said "account cleared" was hot on my sleeve like a piece of red-hot charcoal. Dr. Aiden. Graham put down the cup. Do you want me to take you to rest? I clenched the notepad, looked up, and smiled at him. No need. I want to go to the kitchen again. Maybe I can find something useful. His smile froze for a moment. The kitchen is also locked. We have to wait for the police. I'm a doctor, I interrupted him. If someone accidentally ingests poison, I need to know the source in advance. He said nothing more, and when he turned around, the hem of his suit brushed against Serena's broken wine glass. I squatted down to pick up the broken pieces of the cup, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw him touching his pocket, where there was a rectangular hard object, like a USB drive. The snow was still beating against the windows. I pushed my hot cocoa aside. There was a new note on the bottom of the cup. I had just written it. Graham, surveillance failure. Lab. In the distance, Isabel's sobs were heard, mixed with the howling of the blizzard. I touched the scraps of paper on my sleeve, and suddenly remembered the text message Serena sent me last week. Claire, some secrets are buried deeper than the snow in the Rocky Mountains. Now I have to dig them out. I pushed my hot cocoa to the corner of the table, the bottom of the cup, making a wet mark on the wood. Graham was still standing there, with some broken crystals on the cuffs of his suit, the remnants of Selena's poisoned wine. It's about surveillance. I turned the notepad to the page about the symptoms of aconitine poisoning. Aconitine takes effect quickly, and death can occur in half an hour at most from oral administration. The sip that Selena took when she cut the champagne tower was the key contact point. I looked up at him. If we can't find out who touched the wine glass, the next person to be poisoned could be you, me, or anyone who touched the tableware. His Adam's apple moved, and his knuckles turned white. Follow me. The monitoring room was behind the banquet hall, and the door handle was wrapped with electrical tape. As Graham punched in his password, I caught a glimpse of a thin callus on the second joint of his index finger, a habit of a former lab assistant who loved to pinch test tubes. When the screen lit up, it was full of snowflakes. He knocked on the host. The main server is broken. We can only use the backup. The picture jumped a few times, and suddenly Leon's face appeared. The time showed it was 11 o'clock last night. Leon was wearing a dark gray sweater and no tie, and was walking stealthily towards the kitchen. In his hand he held a black box, like a velvet box for rings, but heavier. He said he read the vows in his room, the night before the wedding. I poked the screen with the tip of my pen. Does that count as reading the vows? Graham didn't respond, and quickly cut to the next segment. It was Leon again. At 1 o'clock in the morning, he came out of the kitchen. The box was gone, and his cuffs were stained with white powder, like powdered sugar or soda. That's enough. I closed the notepad. Thank you. He breathed a sigh of relief, and when he turned around, his lower back hit the USB drive on the corner of the table, and the metal buckle made a slight sound. Isabel was crying in the bridal lounge, her mascara smeared into 2 black worms. When I handed him the tissue, I glanced at the wedding schedule on the table. The gold embossed title was wrinkled by tears. Can you lend it to me? I pointed to the champagne ceremony column at the bottom of the process chart. Selena changed the style of the champagne glass 3 times. She sniffed. The first time she wanted Swarovski, the second time she wanted Baccarat, and finally she insisted on custom-made crystal glasses to give them a special feel. She dug her nails into the back of her hand. Even my bridesmaid bouquet was a leftover from her selection. She said, "Isabel, pink looks good on you." But I clearly told her that I'm allergic to pollen. I turned to the notes page and saw the last item written by Selena. All guests use custom cups, including the head table. The handwriting was so heavy that the pen pierced the paper. She's always like this, trying to grab everything. Isabel suddenly sneered. Even Leon, we dated for 3 years in college, and she got drunk and ran to his dorm, saying, "I'm looking after Isabel's boyfriend." I wrote custom champagne glasses on the note and paused for a moment. If all the glasses were customized, then the murderer would have to know in advance which glass was Selena's if he wanted to poison her. The wine cabinet was in the corner of the kitchen. It was locked, but there were signs of prying in the keyhole. I took out the hemostatic forceps commonly used in emergencies, pressed them gently, and the lock opened with a click. On the innermost layer there is a brown glass bottle. The label has been turned white by alcohol, and you can barely make out the words Aconitum plant extract. There is residual dark brown liquid at the bottom of the bottle, and when you smell it closely, you can smell the scent of bitter almonds, the typical smell of aconitine. That's an old item. Graham stood behind him without him noticing when the hotel was still the private residence of a mining tycoon. There was a laboratory in the attic that specialized in studying the composition of minerals. This bottle was left behind 20 years ago, and has been sealed here since I came here. I pointed at the scratches on the bottle. How can a bottle from 20 years ago have fresh pry marks? He tugged at his tie. Maybe a rat? I didn't respond and put the bottle into the pocket of my white coat. Emergency doctors always carry evidence bags with them, and it came in handy today. Edward was drinking whiskey in the lounge, the crystal glass clinking against the ice ball. When he saw me, his eyebrows knitted into a knot. "Dr. Aiden, do you need help?" "Selina came to see me last week." I pretended to adjust my sleeves. She mentioned the mining accident. She said 18 people died in my father's mine. His hands shook, and the whiskey spilled on his shirt. "You're talking nonsense." He grabbed his coat and was about to leave, but then stopped. What else did she say? She said they used compensation to keep her mouth shut, but I won't. I stared at the corners of his red eyes. "Mr. Edward, do you know Accompany?" He didn't answer, but slammed the door and knocked over a chair as he left. I squatted down to pick it up, and found that there was still half a mouthful of wine left in his glass. The color was darker than pure whiskey, with a strange purple hue. I took out the pH test paper I carried with me, and dipped it in the wine. The test paper turned blue instantly. The alkalinity exceeded the limit, as if some plant extract had been added. Selina's dressing room still smelled of her perfume, orange blossom mixed with wormwood. I looked through her jewelry box and found an iron box at the bottom with the lock pried open. The pieces were scattered at the bottom of the box, and I squatted on the ground to put them together. "If you see this letter, I have already decided. They think they can buy everything with money. The word revenge is the clearest. The ink spreads out like tears." I wrote possible suicide on a notepad, with the question mark so long it nearly pierced through the paper. "Dr. Aiden." Graham's voice came from the door. "The technical department said that the attic wiring may affect the monitoring. I have to go to check it out." He shook the flashlight in his hand. "Would you like to come with us?" I stuffed the pad into my bag and followed him outside. The wooden stairs to the attic creaked under his feet, and his shadow was stretched out by the flashlight, like a black curtain. The wind poured in through the cracks in the ceiling, bringing with it the chill of snow. I touched the aconite bottle in my pocket, and suddenly remembered what Selina had said in her text message. Some secrets are buried deeper than the snow on the Rocky Mountains. Now I'm going to dig through the bottom layer of snow. The wooden stairs to the attic creaked again under my feet. The light from Graham's flashlight hurt my eyes, and he walked very slowly, his back as tense as a violin string. "The line is on the left." He raised his hand to shine at the corner, but I caught a glimpse of the gap between the wooden boards at his feet. There was a faint scratch, so fresh that I could see the white wood underneath. I squatted down and touched it. Graham's shoe tips suddenly blocked the light. "Dr. Aiden, the floor is in disrepair. Secret door." I simply scratched the gap with my fingernails. The wooden board didn't move at all, but a click sound was heard. Graham's breathing suddenly became heavy, and when I looked up, I met his red eyes. The moment the door opened, dust flew out. I covered my mouth and nose and used the flashlight to see clearly inside. Faded laboratory tables, dusty test tube racks, and crooked words painted in red paint on the wall. "They will regret it." The last word, regret, was dragged out very long, like a drop of undried blood. I took a closer look and found that the strokes of the word regret were exactly the same as the fragments in the iron box in Selina's dressing room. "Selina's mother's laboratory." Graham suddenly spoke, his voice hoarse as sandpaper. 20 years ago, before the Hawke family bought this hotel, Mrs. Vaughan was a chemist at the Institute of Mining. She studied ore purification, and always said that she could make Vaughan mining a fortune. I turned to the lab bench. The glass jar contained dark brown roots, the tubers of aconitum. exactly the same as the poison in Selena's champagne glass. The hardcover notebook was half open, the edges of the pages were curled up, and the top page was filled with molecular formulas. "Don't look." Graham suddenly grabbed my wrist. His fingers were as cold as ice. "That's the extraction steps of aconitine," I interrupted him. "Ethanol reflux extraction, acid-base neutralization, crystallization. I have treated patients who have taken poison in the emergency room, and I have seen similar records in the medical records." I shook off his hand and opened the notebook. Mrs. Vaughn recorded on March 15, 1999. Edward said that the death of 18 people was an accident, but the arsenic in the ore exceeded the standard by 3 times. Graham took 2 steps back, knocking over the test tube rack. Broken glass clattered to the ground. She went crazy. She kept saying the ore was poisonous, and that Edward had bribed the mine inspector. Later, she came in at night to paint the wall, crying and shouting, "They will regret it." Later, when Selena was 10 years old, she jumped into the icy lake in the Rocky Mountains. So Selena's revenge is for her mother. I clenched the notebook tightly, and the edges of the pages pricked my palms and hurt. Suddenly, hurried footsteps were heard outside the attic. Isabel pushed the door open. Her hair was covered with snow, and she was holding a cell phone in her hand. I found it in Leon's coat. He just went to the bathroom, and I saw him deleting emails. Her fingers were shaking so badly that she almost dropped the phone. "The password seems to be the date, Selena's. The day I was diagnosed with cancer." I took the phone. "Last week Serena came to the emergency room complaining of chest pain, and I gave her an order for tests. When the report came out, she cried in the corridor and said, 'Doctor, can you help me remember the date? October 12, 2023, the worst day of my life.'" The screen lights up. The title of the first email in my inbox hurt my eyes. "Money laundering plan completed. Hawk, New Energy, Kai's Cavendish buyer." The sender was Isabel's private email address. "It wasn't me," Isabel screamed. "Leon made me do it. He said that if Selena knew, she would send us all to jail." "Edward." A scream suddenly came from downstairs. I rushed down the stairs with the phone still in my hand. On the sofa in the hall, Edward's neck was tilted, and the whiskey glass fell at his feet, with dark brown liquid on the bottom of the glass. I squatted down and felt his carotid artery. It was beating very weakly, like a dying butterfly. Aconitine. I sniffed the bottom of the glass, the bitter almonds mixed with the burnt aroma of whiskey. Same as Selena's. Impossible. Isabel covered her mouth. "He only drank 2 glasses of wine tonight. The first glass was poured by Leon, and the second glass, I handed over the second cup. Graham stood at the stairs at some point, but I didn't poison it." "Who is that?" I looked up and saw Leon coming down from the second floor. He was not wearing a coat, his collar was open, and his eyes were like knives tempered with ice. "Dr. Aiden." He walked up to me, the tip of his shoe almost touching my knee. "You're going too deep, Mr. Hawke." A steady male voice came from behind. Lucas Blair came out of the banquet hall, holding a black folder, his gold-rimmed glasses reflecting the light. "Mr. Vaughn needs to be sent to the hospital, and Dr. Aiden should help. As for other matters," he opened the folder, revealing the confidentiality agreement inside. "We can talk slowly." Lion's shadow fell over him. I could hear the sound of the second hand on his watch moving. 1 second, 1 second, like he was counting down. Edward suddenly twitched and dug his fingers into the cuffs of my white coat. I looked down at him. His lips had turned black, but he was still moving. "Selena," he breathed weakly. "She knows." The wine glass. The graffiti in the attic lab suddenly flashed before my eyes. I touched the aconite bottle in my pocket and looked at the phone in Leon's hand. The snow was still falling. The hotel heater was on high, but my back felt as cold as ice. Leanne put her hands on my shoulders. "Come with us," he said. Lucas's pen tip rested against the signature line of the agreement. Or, he smiled, do you want to be the second accident with Mr. Vaughan? The moment Leanne's fingers pressed against my shoulder bone, I touched the edge of my phone in the inside pocket of my coat. It was 3 o'clock in the morning on a snowy night. My palms were sweaty, and the anti-slip texture on my phone case was painful. The money laundering scheme email was still lit in my inbox, and Isabel's screams were still ringing in my ears. I have to continue checking on Edward. I lowered my head and tugged at the sleeve of my white coat. Edward's nails were still digging into the fabric like rusty thumbtacks. Lion's hand didn't loosen. I could smell the cedar perfume on his cuffs, mixed with a hint of burnt air. Exactly the same smell he had on him when Selina was poisoned. His watch flashed on his wrist. I remembered that when Selina fell last night, his hand, which was supposed to support her, suddenly retracted, and his fingertips rubbed against the inside pocket of his suit, where a hard lump in the shape of a mobile phone later appeared. Now his cell phone is held in his left hand, and the screensaver is Selina's engagement photo. Her smile is particularly dazzling in the dark night. Dr. Aiden. Lucas tapped the agreement with the tip of his pen. The Hawke family's sincerity is limited. I bent over to feel Edward's pulse, taking the opportunity to shove my phone into the deepest part of my pocket. His fingertips were already cold, and a bubbling snoring sound came from his throat, overlapping with Selina's dying voice. "Selina, wine glass," he said again, with dark red saliva oozing from the corners of his mouth. As I straightened up, Leanne's hand finally loosened. I walked towards the kitchen, clutching Edward's whiskey glass. The dark brown liquid at the bottom of the glass left a thin streak. The arc was exactly the same as the streak at the bottom of Selina's champagne glass. Graham was in the kitchen making coffee, the steam blurring the lenses of his glasses. I put the wine glass on the operating table, and his pupils behind his glasses shrank. "Accompany," I said, "same as Serena's." He didn't respond, but turned around and opened the wooden cabinet on the bottom shelf. The musty smell mixed with the aroma of coffee beans came out, and he took out a hardcover notebook. The cover had faded to beige, and the corners were curled up as if it had been soaked in water. "This hotel has more secrets than the account books." He turned a page and pushed it over. 20 years ago, Mrs. Hawke was researching this in the attic laboratory. The handwriting on the paper was very beautiful. The words "Accompany extraction process" was circled again and again in red pen, and the signature was Mary Hawke, Selina's mother, who died in a skiing accident 5 years ago. I thought of the graffiti wall behind the secret door in the attic. The handwriting, "They will regret it," was exactly the same as that in the notebook. "Selina came to look through the book last month," Graham said, lowering his voice. "When she asked me for the key, she said, 'Some debts need to be paid.'" I pulled out my notepad and crumpled the pages with the tip of my pen. "Selina was poisoned at 9:17 and Edward was poisoned at 11:05, with a gap of nearly 2 hours. But aconitine takes 15 to 30 minutes to take effect when taken orally, so the timeline of the poisoning in the two people does not match, unless they ingested the toxin at almost the same time. Champagne glass and whiskey glass." I drew arrows on the timeline on the note. Different containers, same poison, but different onset time. Maybe it was swapped. Graham said suddenly, "Selina's champagne glass is custom made, with her initials on the inside of the cup. When I set up the glass tower last night, the one on the far left was engraved with, but when she fell, I saw the engraving on the bottom of the glass was on the right side." I looked up suddenly. Isabel's room was on the easternmost side of the second floor, and through the kitchen window I could see that her desk lamp was still on. As I rushed out, I knocked over the coffee cup, and the brown liquid spread on the tile like a pool of coagulated blood. Isabel opened the door and immediately retreated back, holding Selina's veil in her arms. "What do you want to ask?" Her voice trembled. Did Lan ever touch the champagne glass?" I interrupted. She twisted the tassel of her veil with her fingers, her fingernails turning blue. Before cutting the cake, he said, "The positions are asymmetrical," and bent down to adjust the order of the cups. I was helping Selena adjust her veil, so I didn't see which cup he moved. She suddenly looked up, but when Selena was choosing a cup, Leon touched the back of her hand. He said, "Choose this one." I picked it. My pad was digging into my ribs in my pocket. Selena was supposed to take the leftmost cup, but after Leon's adjustment, she took the right cup. If the inside of the left cup was coated with Accompany, then the person who made the switch, Dr. Aiden. Lucas's voice came from behind him, like an icicle piercing the back of his neck. The folder in his hand was gone, replaced by a silver fountain pen, the pen cap glowing coldly under the light in the corridor. Mr. Hawke said, "You need to reconsider the terms of your cooperation." I touched the agreement folded in half in my pocket, and the corner of the paper poked my palm so hard that it hurt. "I need to re-examine Serena's body," I said. "Her champagne glass might hold a clue." Lucas's pupils shrank. Behind him, Leon was standing at the stairs, the dim blue light of his mobile phone screen reflecting his tense jawline. As I passed by him, I smelled a burning smell, the smell of an overheated cell phone, and the bulge in the inner pocket of his suit, which was rising and falling slightly with his breathing. The morgue was in the basement, with an iron door with a brass lock. When I took out the spare key Graham gave me, the back of my hand was still sticky with Edward's saliva. The moment the door was opened, the cold white light shone on Selena's face. Her lips were still black and blue, exactly the same as when Edward was poisoned. The champagne glass was on the tray to her right, with a very shallow scratch on the inside of the rim. It was the abbreviation SV, which had been worn off by someone. I leaned in to take a closer look, and saw a light brown film on the wall of the cup, which glowed like mother of pearl under the light. The phone vibrated in my pocket. I fished it out. It was the photo Graham had sent me. It was the last page of a lab notebook, with a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked inside. "Major mining disaster at Hawke Mining. 20 workers killed. CEO Edward Vaughan denies responsibility." The clipping was dated July 15, 2018, just 3 days after Selena was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I looked up at Serena's face. She was wearing bridal makeup, with the diamonds at the corners of her eyes sparkling, but her fingers were curled up, and there were black marks between her nails, not nail polish, but stains from laboratory reagents. "What exactly do you want me to know?" I asked softly. Of course she wouldn't answer, but the champagne glass cast a shadow on the tray, and the notch on the bottom of the glass was faintly visible in the light. It was the worn-out MH, the initials of Mary Hawke. I stretched out my hand, and just as my fingertips were about to touch the wall of the cup, the lights in the morgue suddenly went out. In the darkness I heard the sound of the door lock turning, and the sound of footsteps coming from the stairwell, approaching the basement step by step. The moment the lights went out, my back pressed against the wall. The temperature in the morgue was already low, and at this moment cold sweat ran down my spine, sticking my shirt to my skin. The sound of the door lock turning was getting closer and closer. I reached for the phone in my pocket and pressed the flashlight with my thumb. The pale light pierced the darkness and illuminated the swaying figure on the doorframe. "Who?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No one responded. Only the iron door was clanging. I picked up the ice shovel from the corner and held it in my hand, while using my other hand to reach for the light switch. With a click, the light went out, but the shadow of Selena's body was stretched out very long. Her dark blue lips glowed a strange purple in the light of the phone. The moment the bolt was pushed open, I rushed over and used an ice shovel to block the gap. The force outside paused, and then Lucas's voice came. "Dr. Aiden, Mr. Hawke said it's time to rest. Get out of the way." I gritted my teeth, the edge of the ice shovel hurting my knuckles. "You'll get hurt." His tone was still gentle, but the door was hit even harder. I took a half step back, leaned my back against the morgue, and my fingertips touched the champagne glass on the tray. The wall of the cup was freezing cold, but it suddenly reminded me of the poisoned patients who were pushed into the emergency room. The last clues they held were often hidden in the most inconspicuous places. Finally, the door stopped moving. I heard the footsteps fading away, then I let go of the ice shovel and slumped to the ground. The phone screen was on, and Graham's photo was still on the newspaper clipping page. In the 2018 mining disaster, Edward Vaughan's name was circled 3 times in red pen. Selina's diagnosis was dated July 8. 3 days enough for a daughter to know that her father could even tamper with the hospital's examination report in order to cover up a mining accident. I pulled out the alcohol cotton from the pocket of my white coat and gently wiped the inside of the champagne glass. A piece of the light brown film was rubbed off, revealing the original color of the glass underneath, and a faint line, like the veins of a dead leaf. Articles in medical journals suddenly surfaced. Aconitine partially decomposes when exposed to alcohol, leaving a residue that could cover fingerprints. I dug out the tweezers from my first aid kit, and the flour I borrowed from the kitchen was still in its plastic bag. Graham had given it to me half an hour ago with a wink and the words for souffle. I poured a little flour and sprinkled it on the rim of the cup. I rolled a piece of sticky note paper into a thin tube and gently blew away the floating powder. Gradually, several crescent-shaped indentations appeared on the wall of the cup, which were the edges of fingerprints. I took out the transparent tape I got from the nurse's station, carefully stuck it on, and then tore it off. The lines on the notepaper matched the fingerprints on Selina's right index finger. Exactly. How could it be? I muttered to myself. Lyon said before that he swapped the positions of the left and right cups, but if the poisonous cup was the left cup that Selina was supposed to hold, then why were there her fingerprints on the right cup she was holding now? Unless I dug out the wedding schedule which I got from Selina's dressing room. The last page had a handwritten note. Champagne glasses need to be customized, with the abbreviation SV engraved on the inside. All guests will use the same batch of crystal. The handwriting was beautiful, and the last stroke of the pen paused so heavily that it pierced the paper. She's not doing this to show off, I said to the air. Customized cups mean that each cup has the same thickness and weight, so even if someone switches positions, the gesture of holding the cup will not change, and aconitine is coated on the inside of a specific cup, just waiting for someone's finger to press on it. I heard footsteps on the stairwell, and quickly shoved the note behind my badge. I looked up and saw Isabel standing at the door. She had light makeup on, but the teardrop mole at the end of her eye was rubbed red. I saw Lucas running to the basement. "Are you okay? You said Serena owed you $1 million in gambling debts." I asked directly. "Is that true?" She twisted the hem of her skirt with her fingers. The lace edge was torn out of shape. "It's not a gambling debt. We invested in a lab project together, saying it could cure pancreatic cancer. But after I transferred the money, the other party ran away with the money. She cried and said she would compensate me. But then one day she suddenly laughed and said, 'I will make everyone regret it.' Pancreatic cancer." I thought of Selina's curled fingers in the morgue and the black reagent stains between her nails. That was not makeup, but picric acid in the laboratory, used to fix tissue samples. She had been preparing for it since the day she was diagnosed. Her diagnosis was fake, I said suddenly. Edward changed the report to make her think she had 6 months left. In fact, there are only 3 months left," Isabel continued. Her voice was as light as a sigh. She secretly read her father's private emails. She was drunk that day and said, "He thinks he can buy his life with money, but I want him to buy it with his life." The wind and snow outside the window were hitting the glass. I took out my notepad, which was filled with clues from the past 3 days. The wine glasses swapped by Leon, Edward's mining accident, Graham's laboratory, and Isabel's investment. Now all lines point to the name at the center. Serena Vaughn. She put poison on the inside of the left cup. I said to the flames in the fireplace, the firelight making the handwriting on the notepaper flicker. She wanted to kill Edward because of the 20 lives lost in the mine accident. Corian switched the cups, and she got the right cup, so she committed suicide. Isabel covered her mouth. But why did she? Because Leon's action of replacing the cup happened to be in the blind spot of the surveillance. I flipped through the surveillance screenshots on my phone. Leon's hand blocked the camera. If she died under the cup that Edward should have taken, the police would trace it back to Edward. But now everyone thinks it was murder. Isabel's voice trembled. She used her own life to make Edward live in suspicion, and let Leon bear the secret of swapping the cups, so that I want you to get the compensation money she hid in the laboratory. I pointed to the initials MH on the notepad. Mary Hawke is the old owner's wife. The combination of her safe deposit box is her wedding date. Selena has transferred the money in a long time ago. You can get it when the snowstorm stops. Isabel looked up suddenly, tears welling up in her eyes. I closed the notepad, and the last page read, "She died so they could live." There were footsteps on the stairs, and this time there were a lot of people. Leon, Edward, Lucas, and Graham stood at the back holding emergency lights. Leon's eyes swept over the notepad in my hand, and his Adam's apple moved. "Dr. Aiden, everyone is waiting for you in the banquet hall." I held the notepad tightly, and the edge of the paper hurt my palm. The blizzard was still howling outside, but I knew that someone had to say what needed to be said. Okay, I stuffed the notepad into my white coat pocket. I'll go now. The emergency lights in the banquet hall hurt my eyes. I stood in front of the remains of the champagne tower, the notepad in the pocket of my white coat poking at my ribs. 3 days ago there were 36 layers of crystal glasses piled here. Now there were only a few pieces left that were broken when Selena fell, like broken diamonds scattered all over the ground. "Come here." I patted the edge of the table. Leon stood in the front row, clutching his sleeves, his knuckles turning white. Edward leaned against the fireplace, his collar covered with cigar ash. Isabel huddled in the corner, her nails digging into her palms. Graham held a stack of surveillance tapes, the metal buckles rubbing against the door frame making it creak. I pulled out a notepad. The first page contained a scribbled summary of Selena's autopsy report. Time of death 2117, aconitine poisoning, no residual stomach contents. The second page contained a fingerprint rubbing from a wine glass. On the inside of the left glass was a half-finger fingerprint. That was Selena's own. This is not murder. I turned to the third page, which showed a diagram of a champagne tower. Selena poisoned the inside of the left cup. She knew her father had a habit of holding the top cup with his left hand when cutting a champagne tower. Isabel took a breath suddenly. That day she insisted that Edward stand on the left. Yes. I nodded. She wanted to put the poisoned cup into Edward's hands, but someone changed the plan. I looked at Leon. "Groom, you switched the positions of the left and right cups." Leon took a half step back and knocked over the champagne bucket next to him. "I didn't. Are you just afraid that the surveillance camera will catch you hiding your phone?" I pulled out my phone, and the email interface lit up on the screen. "You and Isabel's investment project is actually money laundering. Selena installed a camera in the lab, and she filmed the whole process when you switched the cups." Lucas suddenly took a step forward, his eyes narrowed behind his gold-rimmed glasses. "Doctor, empty words are not enough. Based on this." I clicked on the video on my phone. The picture shook, and Leon's hand stretched out from the blind spot of the surveillance camera and exchanged the left and right cups. In the background, Selena's voice was very soft. "Leon, do you really think I can't find those offshore accounts?" Lucas's Adam's apple moved, and he took 2 steps back and bumped into the bar. "She knew she wouldn't live long," Graham said suddenly. He put down the videotape and put his knuckles against his temple. 3 months ago, she came to my lab and said she wanted to borrow something from her old trade. I asked her what she wanted to do, and she said, he paused. She said she wanted to make those who deserved it feel hurt for the rest of their lives. Isabel burst into tears. She showed me the list of mine disasters. Edward donated $2 million in her name. But the families of those workers have never even seen the compensation agreement, so she applied poison. I turned to the last page of the notepad, which contained a copy of Selina's diagnosis. She had advanced pancreatic cancer, and only had 3 months left. Edward altered the report, and lied to her that she had 6 months left. The day she secretly read the email, she wrote in the attic, "They will regret it." They were her father, Leanne, and all the people who used her name to cover up their sins. The firewood in the fireplace crackled. Edward's cigar fell on the carpet and burned a black hole. But why didn't she just commit suicide? Leanne's voice was shaking. Because if she committed suicide directly, you would just turn the scandal around. I closed the notepad. She wants you to live in suspicion forever. Edward wonders if he took the wrong cup. Leanne wonders if the action was switched and was photographed. Isabel wonders if the compensation money is stained with blood, and Graham wonders if the reagent he handed over was the murder weapon. The roar of propellers could be heard outside the window. The snowstorm stopped and the searchlight of the rescue helicopter swept over the estate.
Isabel suddenly rushed over and grabbed my wrist. The password to the laboratory safe.
May 17th, 1923, I whispered. The wedding date of the old owner, Mary Hawke. Selina said that the money was for the families of the mine victims, not for you. She let go of his hand, took 2 steps back, and bumped into the back of a chair. I was stuffing my white coat into my suitcase when Liam chased me to the porch. He held the phone in his hand. The screen cracked. "Will you give the video to the police?" I took the phone, opened the back cover, took out the SIM card, and broke it in half. I tore the notepad into pieces and threw them into the fireplace. The flames licked the words, "They will regret it," and soon burned to ashes. Some truths are too painful to tell. I zipped up my suitcase, but there will always be people who will feel pain for the rest of their lives. The sky before dawn was gray. The snow particles kicked up by the helicopter propeller hit my face like fine salt. I fastened my seatbelt and looked out the porthole toward the backyard. The lights were on in the attic window of Hawke Manor, and I could vaguely see the graffiti that read, "They'll regret it," glowing lavender in the morning light. The rescuer in the co-pilot seat handed me hot coffee. "Going back to Montreal? Let's go to the mining town first." I took out an empty notepad and wrote 20 lives on the first page. He paused and added, "The last move with a girl." The propeller turned faster and faster. The manor became smaller and smaller in sight, but the line of graffiti became clearer and clearer. I closed the book and heard a faint voice in the wind, like the sound of champagne glasses clinking together. "They will regret this." Maybe. But at least she made them remember. As the helicopter flew over the snow-capped mountains, I caught a glimpse of a crack in the rescue bag on the back seat, revealing half of a silver evidence bag. It was Selina's wedding ring, with MH engraved on the inside, Mary Hawke's initials, and the owner of the combination to the laboratory safe. I said nothing, and put the pad under my legs. Some secrets should be taken away by the wind. Some secrets are just beginning. The roar of the propeller had just subsided, and I was bending over to pick up the stethoscope that had rolled out of the suitcase, when suddenly a pair of eyes locked onto the back of my neck. Victor Miller, from the provincial procuratorate. The man in the dark grey windbreaker stood at the entrance, holding up his ID. Snowflakes stuck to his shoulder badges. "I'm ordered to investigate the 2018 Vaughan mining accident." His eyes swept across Edward's stiff back. I didn't expect to run into a murder scene here. As I straightened up, my fingers touched the empty legal pad in my windbreaker pocket, the same one I had burned last night, the ashes still clinging to the cracks in the fireplace bricks. From now on, I will take charge of all personnel and evidence. Victor's leather shoe heels tapped on the marble floor and stopped in front of me. I heard that you hold key information. I didn't say anything and took out the sealed autopsy report from the first aid kit. Glued to the plastic cover was a photo of the corpse spots on the back of Selina's hand. Bluish purple with blurred borders, which was consistent with the characteristics of acute aconitine poisoning. Look at her right index finger. I turned to the close-up page, and the brown powder between her fingernails was magnified into granules. It was found during the sampling yesterday. Metal testing showed that it contained titanium and nickel. Graham suddenly said, "This is the coating on the inside of a custom champagne flute." He pulled a brown paper bag from his suit pocket. An old scar marked his knuckles. I found it this morning when I was cleaning out the attic lab. There was a rustling sound of papers. At the top was a yellowed experimental record signed Eileen Vaughan, the name of Selina's mother. Victor turned to the last page and heard an electric noise in his earphones, followed by a woman's voice. They use compensation to silence the relatives and use mining accident data to exchange for stock prices. The toxicity of aconitine is increased tenfold. If one day, that's enough. Edward suddenly cut off the recording. His face flushed. This has nothing to do with my daughter's death. Isabel's suitcase hit the ground with a thud. As she rushed over, I smelled the lingering scent of Serena's perfume on her wrist, the same scent she had at the wedding, bitter orange mixed with rust. She sent me a text message before she died. She grabbed my sleeve, her nails almost digging into my flesh. Just 3 words: "Don't forgive." My throat tightened. When I was sorting out her phone yesterday, I did see the draft box in the deleted messages, but I didn't scroll down. I thought she was mad at me for not paying back my gambling debts. Isabel's tears fell on the back of my hand. It turns out she wanted me to remember those who were buried in the mine. Enough. Lucas suddenly grabbed Leon's arm and walked out the door. The Hawk family does not need to cooperate with the local investigation. Victor blocked the way and waved his ID in front of Leon's eyes. The provincial prosecutor has the right to detain people involved in the case. He turned to me, his eyes softened. "Dr. Aiden, is there anything else you want to add?" That took out the fingerprint rubbing paper from my trouser pocket, the one I had printed on the wine glass with lipstick last night, with powder still on the edge. "The real murderer is dead." I lowered my voice and said, "But she used her life to set up a trap, making the father suspect that he handed the wrong cup, making the groom suspect that the swap was filmed, making the bridesmaids suspect that the money was stained with blood, and making the manager suspect that the reagent was the murder weapon." I pointed in the direction of the morgue. "She wants the living to live in her suspicion forever." Victor's Adam's apple moved. When he stuffed the rubbing paper into the inside pocket of his suit, I caught a glimpse of a joint letter from the families of the victims of the mine disaster. When the helicopter landed for the second time, the snow had stopped. I dragged my suitcase towards the parking lot, my breath condensing into white mist in the cold air. "Dr. Aiden." I turned around. A woman in a camel coat stood under an old pine tree, holding a silver USB flash drive in her hand. There was a wisp of white hair at her temples, and her eyes were like deep pools. "Someone asked me to give this to you." "Who?" She didn't answer, just put the USB drive in my hand and left. The metal was cold, pressing against the lines of my palm like a piece of frozen ice. I looked down at the USB drive and saw tiny letters engraved on the back. L. These are the initials of Serena Vaughan. As the engine roared overhead, I stuffed the USB drive into the compartment of the stethoscope. The wind blew up the snow on the ground, blurring the woman's back. Some secrets are just about to be revealed. I had just pushed my suitcase into the guest room when there was a knock on the door. The moment the door opened, Anna Jo squeezed in with her cell phone in hand. The cuffs of her black turtleneck sweater were stained with snow and the lens cap was still dangling from her wrist. "Dr. Aiden," she said, thrusting the phone screen in front of my eyes. Look at this. There was a blurry surveillance video on the screen. The time showed it was 10:17 on the eve of the wedding. Leon Hawke, wearing a dark grey suit, was hunched over and crawling into the kitchen storage room. He held a small transparent bottle in his right hand, and the bottle reflected the light like a piece of frozen ice. When the police came to collect the footage yesterday, they asked me to delete this part. Anna pressed the pause button. In the picture, Leon's finger was resting on the bottle cap, but I make documentaries, so I always save an extra copy. She took out a silver USB flash drive from her coat pocket. The original video is in it, along with the timeline I compiled. My hand holding the USB drive suddenly started to tremble. When I checked the wine cabinet 3 days ago, I touched a similar empty bottle in the secret compartment at the bottom. There was still half a label stuck on the glass, which was the English abbreviation of Accompany solution. Thank you. I put the USB drive into the pocket of my white coat. Can I borrow your computer? 20 minutes later, the sound of Victor Miller's leather shoes was deafening in the corridor. He stared at line on the computer screen, his Adam's apple moving. I'll contact the technical department right away. He paused and added, the Hawke family's lawyer just went to the bathroom. The guys in the technical department are more efficient than I thought. When the deleted emails popped up on Leon's phone, I heard my own breathing. The sender was Isabel, and the title contained only 3 words, processed. The main text was even shorter. The account has been cleared, and we'll do as you say. The attachment was a transfer record. The sender was Hawke New Energy, and the recipient was Isabel's offshore account. The amount was exactly the $1 million gambling debt she owed Selena. Mr. Leon, do you need to explain? Victor's voice was like a piece of ice. The door to the lounge was not closed tightly. I was standing in the hallway when I saw Lean suddenly stand up and smash his coffee cup against the wall, breaking into pieces. She doesn't care about me at all, he roared with red eyes. From the day she found out she had pancreatic cancer, she just wanted to destroy my dad's company. She knew my dad and Edward were competing for new energy projects, so she deliberately designed this suicide. He suddenly got stuck, as if he realized he had missed something. My temple was throbbing. 3 days ago, when Selena collapsed in front of the champagne tower, her hand gently touched the back of Leon's hand. At that time I thought it was an instinct when approaching death, but now I understand. It was a test. She was confirming whether Leon really replaced the cup. That's enough. Lucas's voice exploded through the door. We're going to sue. No need. Anna's voice came from behind. She held up her phone, and on the screen was a newly released short film. Graffiti in an abandoned laboratory saying, "They will regret it." Graham touching the laboratory operating table and saying this hotel hides more secrets than account books, and Isabel crying while clutching Selena's text message. She asked me to remember the people in the mine. Half an hour later, my phone started vibrating. The local news push popped up. The topic and Rocky Mountain wedding murder reveals the dark side of the mining industry has become a hot search. Victor texted me. The provincial department requested a joint investigation into the relationship between Vaughan Mining and the Hawke Group. As the night fell, I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through my notepad. Suddenly, a crumpled note slipped out from between the pages. It was what I had written on the first day of investigating the scene. The temperature of a champagne glass is 2 days slower than that of other glasses. I stood up suddenly. On Selena's wedding schedule, her name was signed in the lighting adjustment column. When I checked the light control panel yesterday, I sprayed it with luminol and did pick up her fingerprints. I found the infrared thermometer from my first aid kit. The crystal chandeliers in the banquet hall were swaying overhead, and I held the instrument up to the champagne glasses in the display case. The moment the number popped up, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The residual temperature of the cup wall was 8 degrees lower than the room temperature. This means the cup has been frozen. The solubility of aconitine decreases at low temperatures. Selena wanted the poison to melt due to her body temperature when she toasted, but Leanne changed the cups ahead of time. The poison she had applied to the inside of the custom cup hadn't completely dissolved, and instead it killed her. I took out my phone and looked through my address book. Roger Carter is the hotel's lighting engineer. He handed me a magnifying glass when he was checking the circuit the day before yesterday. The phone rang 3 times and he picked it up. "Dr. Aiden, what do you want to see me so late? Can you help me check the lighting control system?" I stared at the lock on the control panel. Maybe something has been overlooked. "Now." He hesitated for 2 seconds. "Okay, I'll bring the tools over." As the sound of metal clanging rang out in the corridor, I saw Roger walking towards me with a toolbox. The moment he squatted down and opened the control panel, I caught a glimpse of several coils of black wires inside, a bit like the circuit diagram in Selena's laboratory. My hand holding the thermometer was shaking a little. I rubbed the words "the temperature of the champagne glass is 2 pestiter lower" on the notepad so many times that the edges of the paper became hairy. I was staring at the light control panel on the wall when Roger's toolbox clanged down the hallway. He walked in a hurry. His breath was misty. "Dr. Aiden, it's so late. Look inside." I pointed to the keyhole. He squatted down, and the tool scraped against the metal panel. The moment the lock opened, I caught a glimpse of the black wires tangled inside. They looked exactly like the wiring on the circuit diagram in Selena's laboratory. "This line has been tampered with." Roger picked up a copper wire with his tweezers. It was originally connected to the stage temperature control system. He looked up. Who would change this? My throat tightened.
When Selena collapsed in front of the champagne tower 3 days ago, her hand had pressed on the light panel.
Her name was signed in the lighting adjustment column on the wedding schedule, and the fingerprint sprayed with luminol reagent would not lie. "Temperature," I blurt out. "She needs to control the temperature." Roger didn't respond. He stared at the changed line and frowned. "The temperature control system is connected to the banquet hall display cabinet." He gestured in the direction. "It's the glass cabinet where the champagne glasses are placed." I turned and ran towards the banquet hall. The glass of the display case reflected my pale face. Selena's custom-made champagne glass was still there, with beads of sweat condensing on the wall of the glass. The red light of the thermometer swept across the cup. I almost dropped the instrument when the value popped up. It was a full 8 degrees lower than room temperature. Aconitine has low solubility at low temperatures. I spoke to the air, as if reciting a toxicology class in medical school. The crystals adhere to the rim of the cup, and when they come into contact with body temperature, it will dissolve quickly. Victor's voice sounded behind him. He squeezed in with his forensic team, his white coat still stained with snow. The provincial department sent a thermal imaging team. I handed over the thermometer. "Test all the cups." Half an hour later, the thermal image was spread out on a flat plate. The other cups were warm yellow, but Selena's was cold blue. The temperature difference was 2.3 Gale, exactly the same as the environment required for aconitine to crystallize. She calculated the time. I touched the wall of the cup. "When you toast, your body temperature will melt the toxins." But Lion changed the cup in advance. Victor's pen poked a hole in the notebook. "So that's why she touched Leon's hand? To see if the cup had been replaced?" I nodded. There were footsteps in the corridor, and Graham came over with a leather journal with Mary Vaughan toxicology research printed on the cover, the name of Selena's mother. He turned to the dog-eared page and read slowly. "When the poison combines with low temperature, it will quickly dissolve and enter the blood the moment it comes into contact with body temperature." I stared at the experimental data in the log, and my throat felt dry. Selena's graffiti in the laboratory, "They will regret it," suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. She didn't want to kill anyone. She wanted to be a mirror to expose the dirty things hidden behind mining accidents, money laundering, and gambling debts. By the time Anna's phone lit up, the video had already been uploaded to the internet. She held up the equipment to show us the graffiti in the lab. Graham's words, the text message from the mind that Isabel read in tears, and finally the cold blue on the thermal image. When the subtitles popped up, I heard Anna sniff. She didn't kill anyone, she just let the world see who the real murderer is. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Victor's phone rang. He lowered his voice. Foreign mining's share price has fallen by 37%, and Leon's inheritance rights have been suspended by the Hawk Group. When it was almost dawn, I stood at the door of the hotel dragging my suitcase. The snow stopped, and the morning light filtered through the remains of the Champagne Tower, with the broken glass gleaming a pale gold. "Do you need help?" Roger came over from behind with a toolbox. "I just checked the lighting system. The program that Selena modified is still there." He scratched his head. "If necessary, I can help you simulate the settings of that night." I clutched the notepad tightly. The wind blew snowflakes onto my face, but I wasn't cold anymore. "Okay," I said. "Tomorrow." He nodded and turned to walk towards the hotel. The shadows were stretched long by the sunlight, and the snow made a crackling sound when stepped on. I looked at his back and suddenly remembered the way Selena fell in front of the Champagne Tower. Her eyes were surprisingly bright, as if she had known that her blood would eventually melt all the lies. The notepad was wrinkled in my hand. I had just written on the last page: hypothermia, toxins, body temperature. She used death as a key to open the door to all the truths. In the morning mist, the hotel spire is looming. Roger's toolbox made another knocking sound, mixed with the dripping of melting snow in the distance, like some kind of omen. I dragged the box down the mountain. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a new message from Anna. "The video has been viewed over 10 million times." The wind blew into my collar, but I smiled. "Serena, look, they're finally awake." I was crouching by the ballroom stage when Roger's toolbox clattered down the stairwell. The simulated lighting setting he mentioned yesterday is now hanging on the keychain around his neck. The metal keys collide with each other like a bunch of unopened secrets. "Come." He led me to the lighting control room on the second floor. The console was covered with a thin layer of dust. He wiped the buttons with his sleeve. The night Selena changed the program, I was inspecting the backup circuit. His finger slid across the dimming knob. She adjusted the main light to maximum brightness. I leaned in to look at the dashboard. The pointer stopped at 90%, and the filament of the incandescent lamp glowed red in my memory. The Champagne Tower was illuminated brightly that night, and everyone's eyes followed the reflective crystal glasses. Incandescent lamps heat up quickly. I touched the lampshade, and the metal shell still had the coldness left over from last night. But the temperature is high locally. What about the edges? Roger called up the surveillance playback. In the picture, Selena stood on tiptoe to adjust the light position, her hair brushing across the control panel. She told the main light to only illuminate the Champagne Tower area. He pointed at the aperture on the screen. The temperature outside is at least 5 degrees lower. The phone vibrated. It was a message from Victor. "The medical examiner will be here in half an hour." By the time the lab table was set up in the middle of the banquet hall, Anna's camera was already set up. I put on rubber gloves and took the custom crystal cup out of the evidence bag. There were very fine scratches on the inside of the cup wall, left by the crystallization of aconitine. "Put it back where it was," I said to the medical examiner's assistant. He placed the glass on the 3rd floor of the Champagne Tower, exactly where it was when the crime occurred. Roger hit the dimming button. The incandescent lamp lit up with a buzz, and the light spot accurately covered the cup. I looked at the thermometer. The surface of the cup was 2 Churu, and the edge of the cup was 18 degrees C, completely overlapping with the cold blue area on the thermal image. Now simulate the action of holding the cup. I reached out and grasped the cup's foot. As soon as my fingertips touched the crystal, I heard the forensic doctor gasp. The aconitine crystals dissolved instantly when exposed to body temperature, and light brown liquid seeped out along the wall of the cup, which was exactly consistent with the description of rapid absorption by the oral mucosa. In the autopsy report. Time, I shouted. 17 seconds. The recorder looked up. It coincides with the onset of the poisoning of the deceased. Anna's camera swept across everyone's faces. Victor held the pen, and the tip of the pen left ink spots on the notebook. Lucas stood in the corner with his arms folded, his Adam's apple moved, but he didn't say anything.
Roger, Erna turned to him suddenly. Did you pay attention to the details when Selena adjusted the lights?
He rubbed the back of his neck. She pointed the main light of the champagne tower and said everything has to be perfect tonight. The voice was soft, but it pierced the air like a nail. Lucas finally spoke up. This only proves that she adjusted the lighting. It doesn't prove suicide. I pulled a plastic bag out of my bag. The edges of the notepaper were yellowed, and the handwriting was Selena's. They will regret it. This was found in the secret door of the laboratory. I looked at him, plus her cancer diagnosis report 3 months ago. Enough motivation to plan this revenge. Lucas's fingers gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. The sun was streaming through the French windows as Victor closed his notebook. He stood in front of the remains of the champagne tower, his shadow casting a shadow over the broken glass on the ground. "This is not murder," he said. "This is a will." The broken glass shone a pale gold, like the light in Selena's eyes when she fell. She used death as a pen. Victor looked out the window, where snow dripped from the eaves. She wrote an accusation on everyone's conscience. When the show ended, Anna's camera was still rolling. I put away my notepad and found an extra line on the last page. Roger had written it when I wasn't paying attention. She looked at her watch 3 times as she adjusted the light. I folded the note and put it in my bag. When I was dragging my suitcase to the hotel entrance, I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. Dr. Aiden. The voice was unfamiliar, with a hint of hoarseness and restraint. I turned around and saw a man in a dark grey coat. A silver badge on his collar gleamed in the sun, the emblem of the mining union. Robert Kane. He held out his hand. "Can I spare you 5 minutes?" I didn't shake it. The wind lifted the hem of his coat, revealing the words "Mine Disaster Rescue" embroidered on the inside. "About Vaughan Mining," he said. "There's some evidence you might want to see." The wheels of the suitcase were stuck in the snow. I stared into his eyes. They were so similar to the eyes in Selena's laboratory graffiti, both of which were burning with fire, wanting to burn all the lies to ashes. "Tomorrow," I said. He nodded, turned around and walked into the hotel. In the morning mist, his back overlapped with Roger's for a moment. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a new message from Anna. "The video has been viewed over 20 million times." I squatted down to adjust the wheels of the suitcase. The moment my fingertips touched the snow, I suddenly remembered what Selena wrote in her diary. "Low temperature is the shell of poison, and body temperature is the knife that opens the shell." And at this moment the snow is melting. At 6 in the morning, while I was having my second cup of black coffee in the dining room, Robert Kane arrived. His coat was draped over the back of a chair, revealing the Mine Disaster Rescue embroidery on the inside, like a faded scar. "This is a copy of Serena's medical records." He pushed the brown paper bag towards him, pressing the seal with his knuckles. "She was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer on the same day she got engaged to Leanne." My hands were shaking as I pulled out the medical record. The diagnosis date was May 17, 3 months ago, and the red stamp read, "Montreal Sacred Heart Hospital." The last page has a handwritten note. The patient requests that his condition be kept secret and only disclosed to the attending physician. The signature is Robert Kane. She said at the time that she wanted to do something to be remembered by everyone in the last stage of her life. His voice was hoarse. I thought it was a wedding, a charity dinner. I didn't expect it to be this. The bottom of the coffee cup hit the porcelain plate, and a crisp sound startled the old lady at the next table, and started her look up. I took out my phone and flipped through the photos of the lab graffiti. Those crooked words, "They will regret it, and time will tell," suddenly had order on the screen. I turned the photo upside down, enlarged it, and connected the characters into a line. When life is only a countdown, the only thing I can do is to make your time stop at that moment. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I remembered that Selena looked at her watch 3 times when she adjusted the lights, that she insisted on using customized champagne glasses, and that Leon said she insisted on cutting the champagne tower herself. It turned out that she had calculated the timescale for everything from choosing the venue, adjusting the lights to changing the wine glass. Dr. Aiden, Isabel's voice came from behind. Her eye sockets were swollen like 2 purple grapes, and she was holding a crumpled tissue in her hand. I was about to put away my phone when she glanced at the diagnosis on the medical record. Pancreatic cancer, late stage. Her knees went weak and she almost fell into the empty chair next to her. No wonder she keeps talking about the last wedding dress try-on. No wonder she doesn't want a honeymoon. She suddenly grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. She could have told me I can accompany her during chemotherapy, accompany her to Iceland to see the northern lights, even buy poison for her. I gently pried her hands apart. Her fingertips still had the warmth of yesterday's crying. She doesn't want you to become an accomplice. I thought of the $1 million gambling debt Isabel owed, and how Selena always snatched her male companions and her clients. She knew you would go crazy for her, so she took the hardest part on herself. Isabel suddenly buried her head in my shoulder and cried breathlessly. The smell of her perfume mixed with tears, like a crushed rose. Graham found me as the sweet smell of baking muffins wafted from the kitchen. In his hands he held a brown glass jar, with a yellowed label that read, Accompany extract 1998. Margaret Vaughan, Selena's mother's name. I found it when I was tidying up the attic. He unscrewed the lid, and the smell of medicine made people sneeze. Her mother did plant research, and later, he didn't finish his words, pointing in the direction of the laboratory. Selena came to ask about this bottle of medicine last month, saying that she wanted to do a commemorative experiment. I stared at the handwriting on the label, the same exact handwriting that had scrawled, "They'll be regretful," on the attic wall. It turned out that she spent 3 months turning death into a cup of precisely poisoned wine, from the poison left by her mother, to the customized champagne glasses, to the body temperature diffusion time calculated when adjusting the lights. In the early evening I ran into Edward in the living room. He sat in front of the fireplace with a sandalwood box on his knees, the label still on it. The firelight reflected the white hair on his temples, which looked whiter than yesterday. When she was little, she always said she wanted to pour champagne at my funeral. His voice was like sandpaper. Now I'm holding her ashes. I stood at the door without moving. The carved pine door frame separated 2 worlds. On one side was the dancing flame, and on the other side were my numb toes. She didn't want to kill you. I was shocked when I said this. She wanted you to live and remember who she is. Not the heir to the mining group, not your puppet, but Selena Vaughan, who was suffocated by the truth of the mining disaster. Edward's shoulders shook. The urn shook on his knees, and then he held it tightly. Amid the crackling sound of the firewood, I heard his low whimpering, like a wounded old animal. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Victor, 8 o'clock banquet hall. I straightened my collar over the embers in the fireplace. The snow stopped, and the moonlight shone through the stained glass onto the ground, like a broken starry sky. I don't know what Victor will say next. The crystal chandeliers in the banquet hall were blindingly bright. When I pushed open the door, Victor was standing at the end of a long desk, tapping his fingertips on a stack of papers. Leon leaned against the window with his tie loosened. Lucas sat on a chair with his arms folded, the tips of his leather shoes tapping the ground. Isabel huddled in the corner, her eyelashes still stained with tears. Edward didn't come, probably still guarding the box of ashes. Preliminary conclusion. Victor cleared his throat. Selena Vaughan's death was suicide. Isabel looked up suddenly, tears hitting her collarbone. Lucas sneered. That's it. But during the investigation we found a number of abnormal fund flows between Hawk Group and Thorn Mining. Victor flipped open the file, suspected of money laundering and concealing mining accidents. The case has been handed over to the judiciary. Liam Hawk, the email on your phone about overseas account settlement will keep the prosecutor busy for half a year. Leon didn't move. He stared at the snow outside the window, his Adam's apple rolling. Lucas took out a pen from his suit pocket and tapped the document. Is this her wish? He raised his eyes and saw the reflection of his glasses. That girl had already set up the chessboard, poisoning herself, bringing up the bad debts between the two families, and even taking public opinion into account. I took out my phone, opened a photo, and pushed it onto the table. It was taken by Anna. At 10:17 on the eve of the wedding, Serena stood alone at the attic window. The moonlight filtered through the stained glass, casting star-like spots of light behind her. She was holding a small bottle in her hand, and her profile was like a sharp knife. She asked me to find out the truth. I looked at Leanne, but the truth is never found out. She tore it apart herself. The crowd began to disperse. Isabel stumbled towards me, digging her nails into my wrist. Why didn't she tell me? Because you will die for her. I whispered, what she wants is not to be buried with her, but to be loved by someone alive. Isabel let go and ran away crying. Leon was waiting for me at the end of the corridor. His suit was draped over his arm, and his hair was blown up by the wind, making him look like a boy who had just finished school. She asked me that, he said, his voice cracking. She said, if I'm gone, are you going to remember me as the villain or the victim? Heath moves mountains, and my grace sustains you. I thought of the graffiti on the attic wall and the bottle of Accompany. She doesn't need an answer. I looked at the red corners of his eyes. She wants you to remember this question forever. He smiled, his suit sliding off as he turned. I bent down to pick it up and felt the phone in my inside pocket vibrating. It was an unread email notification, and the sender was Overseas Finance. At 2 in the morning, Anna sent me a message. Her new documentary is out, titled Black Blood on the Champagne Tower. I clicked on it, and the screen jumped to the graffiti wall in the attic. The words "they will regret it" were enlarged, and the narration was a recording of Selena. Sometimes the most poisonous thing is not aconitine, but lies. The ending is in slow motion. The champagne tower was shattered in the close-up, and the wine splashed on the black blood, forming a dark red stream. My eyes welled up when the subtitles popped up. She's dead, but they're awake. Before leaving, I pushed open Serena's dressing room. Her pearl headband was placed on the dressing table, and her foundation cap was not tightened, emitting a faint scent of powder. The notepad was pressed under the headband, and the cover was her favorite champagne color. The last page was written in a sloppy handwriting, with the tip of the pen piercing the paper. If you see this, please tell the world that I am not crazy. I just have had enough of lies. I stuffed the notebook into my backpack. When I closed the zipper, I felt some sticky notes on the inner layer. They were the clues I had written down over the past few days, and now each one had become a period. The snow was quietest before dawn. I dragged my suitcase out of the manor, and the morning mist wrapped around the red brick walls like a ball of white cotton. When I looked back, the stained glass was vaguely visible in the fog, and I vaguely saw Selena standing by the attic window, smiling at me. I will remember you, I said to the fog. When the return flight landed, a message from the hospital popped up on my phone. Temporary examination area in the emergency hall, everyone on standby. After changing into a white coat, I walked towards the hall. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of people came over. As I passed the examination area, I heard the nurse call out, "Bed 3, Robert Carter." The moment the name hit my ears, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stopped and looked through the blue curtain. All he saw was a hand with an old scar on the back, exactly the same as the one on the survivor who was pinned down by Edward in the mine disaster 3 months ago. I stood at the door of the inspection area, and a corner of the blue curtain was lifted by the draft. The nurse's voice was still ringing in my ears. Bed 3, Robert Carter. The hand was still swaying in front of my eyes, and the scar on the back of the hand looked like a twisted earthworm. Exactly the same as the scar on the photo of the survivor who was suppressed by Edward Vaughan in the mine disaster report 3 months ago. Dr. Aiden. Intern Nurse Xiao Ju touched my arm. Bed number 3 needs his blood pressure measured. I clenched the notepad in my white coat pocket, my fingernails scratching the paper. You go first. I forced a smile. I have something to do. The door of the storage room at the end of the corridor was ajar, and some light was coming through. I recognized that figure, Robert Kane, Selina's personal physician. He always wore a dark gray suit when he was stranded at Hawk Manor, but now he was wearing a white hospital coat and holding a brown paper bag with Vaughan's Selina medical records printed on the cover. Dr. Kane. I pushed the door open. His shoulders trembled, and the paper bag almost fell to the ground. Dr. Aiden. He bent down to pick up the paper, and several pages of medical records floated out. Why are you? I'll come find you. I squatted down to help him pick it up. A note slipped out from the medical record. The edges were rough and the handwriting was like a crumpled piece of paper. I decided to use my death to prove their guilt. My heartbeat hurt my ribs. I looked up, holding the note in my hand. Is this from Serena? He didn't say anything, just nodded. There was still half a box of unopened painkillers in the brown paper bag, and the English words on the label were so rubbed by fingers that they became blurry. Oxycodone extended release tablets, a prescription drug for treating cancer pain. She knew she didn't have much time left. His voice was as hoarse as sandpaper cleaning glass. He pulled out a CT image from the paper bag and held it up to the light. The shadow on the film was like a ball of ink that would not dissolve. The tumor spread to the central nervous system and compressed the motor nerves. She relied on willpower to walk in the last few weeks. On the wedding day, his Adam's apple moved. Her hands were shaking when she was cutting the champagne tower. It wasn't because she was nervous, but because her nerves were on strike. I stared at the shadows on the film. No wonder Selina was half a beat slower than ordinary people when handing over the wine glass, and no wonder her wrist was as light as a leaf when Leon helped her adjust her cufflinks. She refused chemotherapy. Robert took the CT scan back. She said, I want to spend my last days somewhere worthwhile. He pointed to the note in my hand. She gave it to me last month and said, if I die, please give it to someone who can see the truth. I carefully put the note into my own notepad. On the inside of the cover are the clues I have memorized over the past few days. The source of Accompany, the order in which the wine glasses came into contact, and the date of the attic laboratory. Now there is one more stroke, the thickest one. I need a copy. I pulled out my phone. For DA Victor Miller. Robert didn't object, just looked out the window. The snow stopped and the sunlight shone through the glass, cutting a white mark on his face. She asked me, he said suddenly, if I'm gone one day, will you remember me as the villain or the victim? I thought of the graffiti on the attic wall. The 5 words, they will regret it, were crooked and sounded like a child's accusation. She doesn't need an answer, I said. She wants everyone to remember this question forever. Victor's office was on the 2nd floor, and the door was open. When I pushed open the door, he was frowning at his computer, with copies of the surveillance footage from Hawks Manor piled on his desk. Dr. Aiden. He looked up. Have you found any new clues? I slapped the copy of the note in front of him. Selina's handwriting matches the attic graffiti. I pointed to the line that said, prove their guilt. This is direct evidence of her subjective will. Victor pushed up his glasses and compared them carefully with a magnifying glass. Indeed. He nodded, then frowned. But the problem is that no one can prove that she swapped the glasses herself. Aconitine was smeared on the inside of the glasses, and the fingerprints were washed away by the wine. I have witnesses. The voice came from the door. Isabel stood there, her face paler than when she was at the manor, holding a cup of coffee with fingerprints all over the walls. When the champagne tower was set up that day, Liam walked over to take a closer look. She said, her throat tightening, and he said, "The cups don't look right," and then he bent down and adjusted the 2 cups on the top. I clutched my notepad. The moment Liam switched the wine glasses was the turning point of Selena's plan. Her poisoned glass was switched to her own hand, and the person she was originally going to poison could be Edward. "Are you sure?" Victor sat up straight. Isabel nodded, tears falling onto her coffee cup. "I thought he was nervous. After all, it was a custom cup with their names engraved on it." She sniffed. "Now that I think about it, the one Selena took after he finished adjusting it was the one he had replaced." "Thank you." I held her hand. "This is very important. Do you think these fragments can settle the case?" A cold voice came from behind. Lucas Blair was leaning against the door frame, his suit straight as a knife. "The law requires a complete chain of evidence." He glanced at the notes on the table. "Can a piece of paper and a memory prove suicide?" I stared at the Hawke family crest on his cufflinks. As he turned to leave, I took out the note from my pocket. In the early morning at the manor, I saw the overseas finance email on Leanne's mobile phone, and as a legal advisor, Lucas could not have been unaware of it. "Wait," I called to him. He looked back, his eyes filled with his usual impatience. I pretended to adjust my white coat, and when he wasn't paying attention, I slipped the note into the inside pocket of his coat. The note only said, "You know she's going to die." "Anything else?" He frowned. "It's all right," I smiled. "I just think that Hawke's lawyer should see his client's secrets." He didn't answer, and turned away. The sound of his leather shoes in the corridor made a crisp sound, which seemed to hit my nerves. When I get off work, I change in the locker room. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Anna. "The new documentary has received a huge response. Someone dug up old news about the Edwards mining accident." I replied, "Okay," and stuffed the notepad into my backpack. Halfway through the zipper, he felt a slip of paper inside the lining, a copy of the one in Lucas's pocket. There were hurried footsteps coming from the end of the corridor. I leaned my head out and saw Lucas standing in the stairwell with his back to me. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out the note. Moonlight filtered in through the window, shining on the back of his neck. I saw his shoulders stiffen suddenly, and his fingers crumpled the corner of the paper. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I blinked my sore eyes at the phone screen. The video Anna sent was still playing in a loop. Lucas had his back to the stairwell window, holding the note between his fingertips, his knuckles turning white. He suddenly smiled with the corners of his mouth twitching, as if he was stung by something, and then he crumpled the note into a ball and stuffed it into the inner pocket of his suit. He shredded it and his message popped up. I followed him to the office and saw him throw the paper in the trash. "Do you want me to steal it?" My typing hands paused. Lucas is the Hawke family's legal advisor, and it is too risky to search for evidence directly. But Roger said that there was an electrostatic generator in the hotel's electrical room. He had demonstrated it last time when he was repairing the corridor lights, and it could suck up scraps of paper to make puzzle patterns. "Don't touch it," I replied. "Wait until dawn." At daybreak, I knocked on Roger's electrician's door. He was squatting in front of a toolbox, cleaning a screwdriver. When he looked up, his glasses reflected the light. "Dr. Clare, can you help me piece together a piece of shredded paper?" I handed him the photo of a trash can on my phone. "Use static electricity." Without asking any questions, he took out a roll of transparent tape from the drawer and moved the small black machine over. The scraps of paper stuck to the tape and slowly floated up with the buzz of static electricity, as if being pulled back into place by an invisible hand. When the words "they will regret it" appeared completely on the white paper, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This was Selena's graffiti on the wall behind the secret door of the attic, and it was also the content of the notes in her diary. She wrote it many times, I whispered, in the laboratory, on the back of the makeup mirror. And even I suddenly remembered that when Selena was trying on makeup before her wedding, she had drawn this line of words on the mirror with lipstick. And Isabel had complained at the time. What crazy is this again? Roger handed me the piece of paper he had put together. Want to keep a copy? Keep it. I pinched the corner of the paper. It may be the key. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Graham knocked on the door of the guest room where I was temporarily staying. He held a yellowed envelope in his hand, with coffee stains on the edges. I found it when I was cleaning the corner of the kitchen. It's stuffed in the back of the cupboard. The envelope was not sealed, so I took out the letter inside. The first page was a handwritten lab record signed Eileen Vaughn, the name of Serena's mother. The second page was a letter, with the same beautiful handwriting as the experimental records. If I fall one day, please let my daughter know that she is not fighting alone. I have recorded the truth of the mine disaster in the secret compartment of the laboratory. Her mother, Graham lowered his voice. I heard that Miss Irene died in a laboratory explosion 10 years ago. Selena was only 16 years old at that time. My hands were shaking as I held the letter. Selena always says they will regret it. It turns out that they are the ones who concealed the mining accident, and fighting is her way of seeking justice for her mother, including using her life as bait. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Victor's siren cut through the snow and fog. He stood in the hotel lobby, holding a tablet in his hand. Lucas Blair, come with us. Lucas's suit was still straight, but his eyes swept over the note in my hand. Why? Based on this video, Victor pulled up the footage Anna had taken. What you tore up was Selena Vaughn's handwriting. He shook the spliced picture on the tablet again. Plus the surveillance footage at Hawk Manor shows that you went to the abandoned laboratory last Wednesday. The laboratory that contains Irene Vaughn's experimental records. Lucas's Adam's apple moved. Are you just helping Lionhawk destroy evidence? Victor stepped closer. Or are you helping Edward Vaughn cover up the mining accident? Lucas curled his fingers into fists at his sides, then slowly unclenched them. He gave me a look that was like broken glass. You win. In the evening I squatted in front of an old metal cabinet in the hotel archives. Leon's financial records filled half of the table. When he turned to the last book, a yellowed receipt floated out. Anonymous donation, Dawn Hospice. Amount 200,000 Canadian dollars. Date the month Selena was diagnosed with cancer. Robert said that Selena always went to the hospice ward to accompany terminally ill patients and secretly paid their medical bills. It turns out that they will regret it is not crazy talk, but her determination to tear apart the lies with death. And those lives that she has warmed are the light she hides in the darkness. Dr. Claire? I looked up and saw Isabel standing at the door of the archive room holding a leather notebook in her arms. Her fingers unconsciously stroked the cover, and I caught a glimpse of a photo on the cover. It was Selena's 16th birthday photo, with a white lab coat in the background. Do you need help? I asked. She shook her head and pulled the notebook closer to her chest. I found this when I was packing up, and I don't know what to do with it. I didn't ask any further questions. Some secrets should be revealed by the person involved. The snow was still falling through the window onto the notebook. I watched Isabel's back disappear at the end of the corridor, and suddenly remembered what Selena said before the wedding. Some truths can only be washed away with blood. At this moment, the snow on the cover of the notebook is slowly melting. By the time I closed Leon's financial account book, the light of the snow outside the window had dimmed. Just as I put the receipt back in its place, I heard hurried footsteps coming from the corridor. The door was trembling from the knocks. I opened the door. Isabel's eyelashes were stained with tears, and the corner of the leather notebook in her arms was wrinkled. Dr. Claire. Her voice was as hoarse as sandpaper. I was just packing a box and found this. She opened the notebook very gently, as if she was touching something fragile. A photo dropped out of the first page. Two girls in college sweatshirts were arm in arm with the floor-to-ceiling windows of the library in the background. I recognized the handwriting on the back of the photo. It was Selena's italic handwriting. "I'm sorry I couldn't be with you until the end." Isabel's tears fell on the photos. I thought she hated me. I thought she stole Ian and all the attention. She pressed the notebook to her chest. "But her album is full of our photos. In freshman year, I fought for the last piece of cake in the cafeteria. In sophomore year, I stayed up late to finish my thesis. In junior year," she turned the pages while sobbing. "In junior year, we invested in that jewelry project and lost all our money. She secretly sold her mother's diamond brooch to fill the hole for me." I took the notebook. Next to the photos on each page are Selena's small handwriting. "Isabel said today that I stole her son, but she doesn't know that she is my light. When she scolded me for meddling in other people's business, her nails dug into her palms. She was trying not to cry. I paid off her gambling debts, but she would rather hate me than bow her head. She didn't mean to hurt you." I pointed to the last photo, which was the night before Selena's wedding, when Isabel threw her veil backstage. "She wanted you to live." I remembered what Robert said, that Selena signed a waiver when she was diagnosed. If she died inexplicably, the police would investigate everyone who had contact with her, including the creditors you owed. Isabel suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Does she know that I was threatened by an underground bank? So you deliberately marked the wine glass to make me the suspect. In this way, those people will not dare to." She covered her mouth, tears streaming down her fingers. I also called her a lunatic. There was a sudden noise downstairs. Victor stood in the hall holding a megaphone, followed by reporters carrying cameras. The case of Vaughan Mining concealing the 2019 Rocky Mountain mining accident that resulted in the deaths of 17 miners has been formally investigated. He nodded at me. Anna's video was a great help. The phone vibrated in my pocket. Anna sent me a link titled Her Last Wish. I clicked on it, and the first thing on the screen was Selena's medical record. Stage 4 pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor. Survival period 6 to 8 months. Then it showed the graffiti on the wall of the attic laboratory. When I zoomed in, I could clearly see the words, "Mom, Irene. I want them to cry for you and the miners." The last recording was Selena's voice. "Mom, if I die in the lab like you did, will they finally take a look at the bones in the mine?" The video ends with surveillance footage from the night before the wedding. Selena stood in front of the fitting mirror and practiced cutting the champagne tower in the air. She smiled 3 times. The first time was too stiff. The second time was too bitter. And the third time she finally looked like a rose about to bloom. The camera zoomed in, and the mirror reflected the pinholes on the back of her hand. Those were left by chemotherapy. "Dr. Clare," Robert's voice came from behind. He handed over a black diary with dried daisies on the cover. "Selena asked me to keep it while she was in the hospital. She said that if she couldn't hand it over to her mother herself, she would find someone who understood her." The words on the title page are so powerful that they can be seen through the paper. If you have read this far, it means that I have completed my mission. Mom, I tore through the lies with what they cared about most: reputation, money, and respectability. The names of the 17 miners will be engraved on the tombstones of Vaughan Mining. I closed my journal. Miss Irene died in a laboratory explosion 10 years ago, but I suddenly understood why Selena wrote, "If she were still alive." Some apologies need the ears of a living person, some truths need the mouth of a living person. At dawn I stood in front of the manor with my suitcase. The snow stopped and the skyline was pale. Isabel chased after her, holding a white rose in her hand. Before she left, she told me to give this to the person who understood her best, if she couldn't make it through the wedding. There was a note wrapped around the rose stem, with Selena's handwriting. "Thank you for watching the sun for me." I looked at the green mountains after the snow and whispered, "You win, Serena. Your blood was not shed in vain." As Isabel turned to go back to the hotel, I suddenly remembered that Serena's dressing room was still unpacked. When I was helping Anna move equipment yesterday, I saw a half-cut red ribbon sticking out of the bottom drawer of the dressing table. I don't know if it was dropped by a bridesmaid. The wind blew up a piece of snow and it flew into my face. I clutched the rose tightly and headed for the parking lot. Some answers may not be revealed until the moment the red ribbon is lifted. My hand holding the white rose suddenly tightened. The rose thorn pierced my palm, and the pain made me frown. The snow stopped, but the wind still blew into my collar. The parking lot was just 50 meters away. A thin layer of snow fell on the silver SUV, like an uncut cream cake. But then I thought about Serena's dressing room. When I was helping Anna move the live broadcast equipment yesterday, I caught a glimpse of half a red ribbon sticking out of the bottom drawer of the dressing table. Isabel was urging the bride to get her makeup done, so I didn't look closely. Now that I think about it, the color of that ribbon was so bright, just like the gold edge on the champagne glass used at Selena's wedding. It didn't look like it was accidentally dropped by a bridesmaid. I turned around and walked back. The squeaking sound of my snow boots on the steps startled a few jays. The dressing room door was not locked. When I opened the door, I saw Selena's veil still hanging in the mirror, and the pearls swaying in the wind, like the broken necklace around her neck. The dressing table was in the corner, made of walnut and carved with fine patterns. I squatted down, hooked the red ribbon with my fingertips and pulled it. The drawer popped open with a click, and inside was a velvet jewelry box, a lipstick tube, and a cowhide envelope hidden in the interlayer. The corners of the envelope were worn and frayed, and the cover was written with "To my daughter" in pen. The handwriting was clear, and the strokes were very light, as if afraid of piercing the paper. My heart was beating so fast, even faster than when I was in the emergency room. I opened the envelope. The letter paper was yellowed like old newspaper, and the first line made my eyes sore. "Dear Selena, if you see this letter, it means that I couldn't stay with you until the end." The door creaked open. I looked up and saw Isabel standing at the door, tears still on her eyelashes. "I saw you didn't get in the car, so I thought you might." Her eyes swept over the letter and she suddenly covered her mouth. Is this from your mother?" I handed her the letter. Her fingertips trembled, and she burst into tears after reading 2 lines. She never mentioned the letter. I always thought she had a bad relationship with her mother, and she always said that Mr. Edward kept all the photos of Miss Margaret in the attic. A photo slid out from the bottom of the letter paper. In the yellowed photo paper, the young Margaret is wearing a white coat, holding the little Selena with pigtails in her arms, and both of them are smiling. Little Selena was holding a test tube filled with light blue liquid, which looked exactly like the color of the champagne tower at a wedding. She always says she looks like her father, with a square face and a tough temper. Isabel wiped her tears with the back of her hand. But these eyes, the curve of her smile, she sniffed. It turns out she looks most like her mother. I remembered the graffiti on the attic wall. "Mother Irene, I want them to cry for you and the miners." Irene should have been Margaret's nickname. "Do you need to confirm the handwriting?" Graham's voice suddenly sounded behind him. He stood at the door at some point, holding a cup of hot cocoa in his hand. Miss Margaret used to come to the hotel often. I helped her collect her lab notes. He took the letter and rubbed his thumb over the writing. "It's hers." He put down the cup and took out a copy of an old newspaper from his suit pocket. She was taken to the hospital after the laboratory explosion 10 years ago. The report said she accidentally took aconitine. The words on the newspaper were very small. I leaned in to read. Neuropharmacologist Margaret Vaughan was poisoned due to experimental error. Family members said it was an accident. Accident? Isabel sneered. Vaughan Mining just got the mining rights for a new mine that year, and 17 miners died. She suddenly covered her mouth. Selena, did she know? I didn't answer, put the letter and photo in the envelope, and went to find Robert. He was in the guest bedroom on the second floor. On the windowsill was Selena's medicine box, labeled oxycodone hydrochloride extended release tablets. Her pain control is not good, Robert said, but the most painful part is not her body. He pointed to the medicine box. She once asked me what the lethal dose of Accompany is. I thought she was doing a research project on hospice care, but now I think, he sighed. She said that when she was a child, she often accompanied her mother in research and watched her mother record data under a microscope. She said that the feeling of using knowledge to fight fate made her feel powerful for the first time. So her death is also a kind of confrontation, I said softly. Robert nodded. After her mother passed away, Mr. Edward destroyed all of Margaret's research materials. Selina searched for 3 years before she found the compensation records for the mining accident. The pensions received by the families of the miners were deducted from Margaret's laboratory funds. I went back to my room and put the envelope on the bedside table. The notepad was spread out, filled with clues. Where did the aconitine come from? What was Leon's motive for changing the cup? Is the mine disaster related to Margaret's death? Now there is an extra line. She is not crazy, she is the heir. I opened Selina's diary, and the words on the title page tear apart the lies with what they care about most. Suddenly overlapped with Margaret's letter. The last sentence of the letter was, "They will regret it, my little soldier." The graffiti on the attic wall turned out to be a copy of my mother's words. There were footsteps outside the window. I looked up and saw Anna standing at the door, holding a photo in her hand with yellowed edges. Her eyes lit up. Just found it in the attic secret door. It may be related to Miss Margaret. I took the photo.
In the photo, Margaret is standing next to the laboratory operating table. On the blackboard behind her is written Aconitine extraction experiment record, and next to it is circled in red pen, Vaughan Mining Mine Water Quality Report.
The wind lifted the curtains, making the sticky notes rustle. I suddenly understood why Selina laughed 3 times at the wedding. She was not practicing cutting the champagne tower, but practicing how to make her own death the sharpest knife. Anna's voice floated from behind. "Dr. Clare, look at the back of the photo." I flipped through the photos. Written in pencil on the back was a line of small words. The blood of 17 miners should not be shed in vain. The snow started falling again. At 3 in the morning, I was scribbling new clues on my notepad when someone knocked on the door. The door opened a crack, and Anna's face squeezed in, with snow on her eyelashes. "Dr. Clare, can you take a look at this?" She spread out her palm, revealing a photo with frayed edges. I found it while sorting out wedding materials. It was taken at 5:17 in the evening. I took it. In the photo, Selina is standing in front of the dressing room mirror, with her veil half draped over her shoulders and a pearl hairpin in her left hand. She pursed her lips in front of the mirror, and the corners of her mouth raised in a very slight arc. Exactly the same smile she had when she was cutting the champagne tower at the wedding. But there was more than just her reflection in the mirror. My fingertips trembled. In the upper right corner of the mirror, a line of pencil writing was mostly blocked by her silhouette. "I will be their judgment." I zoomed in to see it. Anna's voice trembled. The words on the original film were very faint, as if they were erased and filled in with an eraser. I rushed into the monitoring room, holding the photo. Roger was dozing off at the console. When I woke him up, his glasses had slipped to the tip of his nose. "Which section do you want to adjust?" In the hallway outside the dressing room. From 5 to 5:30. He rubbed the back of his neck and tapped on the keyboard, the screen lighting up in black and white. At 5:03, Selina pushed the door open, holding her veil. At 5:12, she stood on tiptoe to write on the mirror. At 5:20, she stepped back half a step and practiced raising her arms in front of the mirror. The exact movement for cutting a champagne tower. "Look here." Anna came over and pointed her finger at the corner of the screen. Selina opened her mouth in front of the mirror, and her Adam's apple moved as if she was saying something. "She's simulating death," Anna said suddenly, practicing how to keep her expression straight and how to make her fall look like an accident. The door of the monitoring room was slammed open. Leon rushed in panting, his tie askew at his collarbone, his cell phone screen still on. "Who gave you the right to rummage through her things?" He pounced on me to grab the photo, and I subconsciously let go, and the edge of the photo paper scraped across my palm. "You reporters." He stepped back, clutching the photo, his chest heaving violently. "She's already dead. Do you still want to exploit her? What are you afraid of?" I realized only after I said this that my voice was calmer than I thought. Leon was stunned. His pupils shrank into needle points. He looked down at the photo. His Adam's apple rolled, and suddenly stuffed the photo into his suit pocket. "This is private." "Leon." Lucas's voice came from the door. He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and scanned the surveillance footage on the screen. According to the prenuptial agreement between the Hawk family and the Vaughn family, all wedding video footage belongs to her. A new voice came from behind Lucas. Victor Hawk stood in the shadows, his white shirt cuffs stained with wine. He was Leon's cousin, and he had been in the wine cellar this morning scolding the waiter for opening the wrong vintage. Every word she left behind is a testimony. Victor loosened his tie and patted Leon on the shoulder as he passed by, including the email to Isabel in your phone. Leon's face turned pale instantly. Lucas opened his mouth, but in the end he just pulled the corners of his mouth and turned away. I fished out my phone, pretended to fix my bangs, and quickly pressed the scan button. The word trial on the back of the photo was captured by the camera and sent to Robert with a ding sound. The snow stopped. I walked to the terrace wrapped in my coat, where a light layer of snow covered the wooden chairs. The legal pad lay open on my lap, and I wrote a new line. She knew she was going to die, but she chose to use death as a weapon. "Dr. Clare," Robert's voice came from behind. I turned around and saw that he was holding a black leather notebook in his hand. The cover was polished to a shine, and there were light brown stains on the corners, like blood, or like medicine stains that had not been wiped off for a long time. "I found it just now when I was sorting out Selena's belongings." He handed me the notebook. "It's in the iron box under the secret door of the attic, together with Margaret's experimental records." When I took it, the line of small gold-plated words on the cover was illuminated by the snow. "To my little warrior." Robert turned and left, his footprints leaving long marks in the snow. I opened the first page, and the wet ink caught my eye. It was Selena's handwriting. It read, "Dad, when you see this, my blood should have seeped into the first layer of the champagne tower." The wind blew snowflakes towards me, and I hurriedly closed the book. The pen fell out of the secret compartment and rolled to the feet. The pen cap is engraved with Margaret Vaughn laboratory, and it is exactly the same as the one Margaret is holding in the photo. As Robert's fingers brushed across the cover of the notebook, I smelled disinfectant mixed with old paper. He lowered his voice, his Adam's apple bouncing on his collar. "I found it in the hospital archives. No one knows how it got in there. Maybe Margaret hid it." The gold-stamped words Margaret Vaughn 1998-2005 on the cover rubbed against my palm. I opened the first page, and the pen words were so powerful that they showed through the paper. On July 15th, 1999, the number 3 mine caved in. Edward said that 3 people were reported dead, but there were actually 2. He asked me to write "sudden heart attack" on the death certificate. The miner's lungs were full of mining dust. My hands shook for half an hour when I looked at the autopsy report. My fingertips are numb. The turning of pages sounded like breaking glass. On the next page was a yellowed photo. A woman in a white coat standing in a laboratory, holding a little girl with pigtails in her arms. It was Selena. On the back of the photo it says, "My little warrior, keep the light for your mother." "Dr. Clare?" Robert's voice seemed to float from far away. "Do you need me to step aside?" I shook my head and continued flipping. In August 1999, Margaret recorded how Edward used cash to silence the families of the victims. In 2001, She was forced to sign a false environmental assessment report. In 2003, she kept notes on preparing a carnitine solution in the laboratory, with a crying face drawn next to the molecular formula and the words, "This thing can kill," but they forced me to study how to hide it longer. It was 3 in the morning, and I was curled up in front of the hotel fireplace. The words on the notepad became more and more chaotic. Margaret's lab, Selena's attic secret door, mine accident cover-up, they will regret it, graffiti, aconitine, poison on the inside of the champagne glass. The last page of the diary made me pinch the back of my hand fiercely. If they continue to hide the truth, one day the poison will come back to them. It's snowing outside the window again. I took out my phone and sent a message to Victor. The evidence of the mining accident is in Margaret's diary. Half an hour later, he knocked on my door, wearing a white shirt without a tie. He clutched a copy of the document in his hand. The Hawke family's legal team is on standby. The hearing will be held at dawn. Why help me? I stared at the wine stains on his cuffs, the same ones I saw in the wine cellar last night. He curled his lips and said, "My brother used to work in mine number 3. When he turned around, an old photo appeared in the inner pocket of his suit. A young man in work clothes, who looked 70%. The hearing was held in the hotel banquet hall. The members of the investigation team were sitting at the long table, and Edward's face was paler than the tablecloth. Victor pushed the copy of the diary in front of him. Margaret Vaughan's laboratory records, the death list of the 1999 mining accident, and the bank statements of you and the former Minister of Mines. Isabel sat in the 3rd row. She stood up suddenly, and a hairpin fell to the ground. When Selena showed me the diary, she said that she didn't want us to hate. She wanted them to feel pain that would never forget the names of those miners. She squatted down to pick up the hairpin, tears falling on the marble. I owed her a gambling debt. She made me lose on purpose. She said only pain can make people remember. Graham was the last to be called to the stage. When I handed him the copy of the diary, his fingers trembled like a sieve. He took off his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on. It's her handwriting. In 2005, she was forced by Edward to burn laboratory materials. I helped her move cartons. It turned out that she had hidden a copy. He looked at the ceiling and smiled. She said, "Some things must be remembered by someone." In the darkest hour before dawn, I went to the cemetery with the diary in my arms. There was a thin layer of snow on Selena's tombstone. In the photo, she was smiling with her head tilted, looking like the little soldier in Margaret's arms. I placed the diary among the white roses, and the white breath I exhaled blurred the tombstone. You win. The list of mining disasters will be made public. Edward's account will be frozen, and Victor's lawyer said. The wind suddenly picked up, and amid the swaying of the pine branches, I heard a very soft thank you. When we returned to the hotel, the morning mist covered the terrace. I sat on a wooden chair and flipped through Margaret's diary, wanting to take another look at the photo of the little soldier. The last page suddenly floated out. It was an older piece of letter paper, with burnt edges and crooked words on it, like a child's handwriting. "Mom, I will help you keep the light." The handwriting was exactly the same as the graffiti next to Selena's champagne tower. I sat on the wooden chair for half an hour, holding the piece of letter with burnt edges. The pages of Margaret's diary rustled against her knees as pine branches brushed against the glass. When I turned to a chapter in the middle, a yellowed paper suddenly slipped out from the inner pages. I bent down to pick it up, and my fingertips touched the handwriting on the paper. It was Margaret's pen, even more sloppy than the one in the diary, with the rigor of an experimental record. Aconitine low-temperature crystallization, blood flow accelerator, a highly effective neurotoxin. I straightened up suddenly. The pad fell from my lap, and the pages scattered all over the floor. Low-temperature crystallization. I read aloud from the formula table. The champagne tower on a snowy night. Each layer of the glasses was immersed in ice mist. Before Selina cut them, the glasses were frozen in a 0-degree environment for at least 2 hours. Aconitine crystals adhere to the wall of the cup and will only dissolve when exposed to body temperature. Blood flow accelerator. I remembered Selina's state when she fell. She ran 2 steps before cutting the champagne tower, and the train of her wedding dress hooked on the table leg, and it was Leanne who pulled her. Running gets your heart rate up and your adrenaline pumping. Just the right amount of speed to accelerate the entry of toxins into your bloodstream. I squatted down to pick up the note and wrote cursively on the top page. She didn't kill anyone, she just replicated her mother's experiment. The pen tip pierced the back of the paper, leaving an ink spot on the wooden chair. The phone vibrated at this moment. It was Victor. The forensic team is here, waiting for you in the banquet hall. The lights in the banquet hall were so bright that it was hard to open your eyes. Metal boxes were stacked on the long table, and the head forensic doctor was picking up Selina's champagne glass with tweezers. Test for adrenaline derivatives. I slapped the formula table on the table. Victor glanced at the paper. Is it related to poisoning? Margaret's research. I pointed to the line that said, blood flow accelerator. Aconitine itself has a slow onset, but adding this thing can allow the toxin to attack the central nervous system within 10 minutes. Selina calculated the time accurately. When she cut the champagne tower, the crystals had just dissolved, and running had just accelerated her heartbeat. The head of the forensic team looked up. It will take 2 hours. Test now. My voice trembled. 2 hours later, the test report was in front of me. Adrenaline derivatives, trace amounts. The team leader pushed up his glasses. It matches the ratio table. Victor pressed his knuckles against the table. The hearing will be rescheduled to tomorrow. I want Edward to hear it clearly. The banquet hall was packed with people the next day. Edward's suit was pressed neatly, but there was a wet spot on the collar.
I never knew about Margaret's experiments. His voice was like rusty gears. It was her private research.
I pulled out my phone and opened the email to take a screenshot. On July 14, 1998, Von Mining donated special reagents to a pharmaceutical company. I turned the phone towards him. The recipient's signature is you. His Adam's apple moved. Special reagents are the raw materials for aconitine used in Margaret's experiments, right? I took a half step forward. Not only do you know about her research, you also provided the source of poison. Do you think you can wipe it clean by burning down the lab? But your daughter found the diary, and even the ratio table. He suddenly grabbed the bottle of mineral water on the table. The bottle was deformed by the pinch, and water flowed down through the fingers, forming a dark circle on the tablecloth. When the meeting was over, Isabel blocked the door. She was holding a photo in her hand, the corners of which were curled, as if it had been repeatedly stroked. I found it when I was packing my suitcase. She shoved the photo to me, tears hanging on her eyelashes. It's in the makeup bag Selina gave me at the bottom. The photo shows a woman in a white coat holding a little girl in a puffy skirt. In the background is a glass cabinet in a laboratory labeled neurotoxin research. On the back was a childish line of words. Mom, I will finish your experiment. She said she wanted to go to Iceland to see the northern lights on her birthday last year. Isabel sniffed. Now I understand that she wanted to see the snow. Snow can freeze aconitine crystals, just like what Mom wrote in her lab notes. I put the photos in a notepad. The evening breeze blew in from the terrace, making the pages of paper rustle. I sat on the wooden chair, tucked Margaret's ratio table on the last page, and wrote, "She is not crazy. She is the air." The pen stopped in midair. There was a very faint smell of medicine in the wind, like disinfectant in the emergency room. I followed the smell and pushed open the old wooden door of the laboratory. The cabinet against the wall was half open. There is a glass bottle on the top layer. The label is torn to half, and the 3 words aconitine can be vaguely seen. There were some white crystals on the bottom of the bottle, which flashed in the sunset and then dimmed. My fingertips felt cold as I held the empty glass bottle. The label was torn to the point where only the 5 words Accompany A were left, and the edges were rough, as if they had been scratched off by fingernails. "This is not the stock of Margaret's laboratory," Graham's voice suddenly sounded behind him. I turned around and saw him staring at the glass bottle, his brows knitted together. Back then, all the reagents were labeled Accompany experimental subject number. I helped her put the labels on them. "You said the lab burned down later." I shook the bottle, and the white crystals remaining at the bottom of the bottle reflected light between my fingers. "Then where did this come from?" His Adam's apple moved.
Maybe they're backup samples. I remember Margaret said that neurotoxins need to be kept at low temperatures, so we need to use...
"Freezer?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes, but then the cabinet disappeared. I looked for it when I was cleaning up the rubble, but there wasn't even a screw left." There were footsteps in the corridor. Roger poked his head in with a toolbox in his arms. "Dr. Aiden, the circuit in the basement has tripped. I was just inspecting the distribution box and found a key stuck in the back." He shook the brass key and pointed it at the broken door in the corner. "It fits perfectly." When I took the key, the metal was still warm from the distribution box. The basement door was so rusty that the key had to turn it 3 times before it clicked. Behind the door there was a musty smell mixed with a cold breeze that made the back of my neck feel tight. At the innermost part, against the wall, there was an old medical refrigerator. The dust on the surface was so thick that you could make palm prints out of it, and half a burnt black wooden board lay on the top, as if it had fallen from the fire scene that year. "Do you need gloves?" Roger handed over a pair of rubber gloves. "I always have them when I repair circuits." I put it on and paused as my fingertips touched the handle of the refrigerator. There were a few fresh scratches on the metal surface, as if someone had recently pried it with tools. The moment the cabinet door opened, cold air rushed out with the smell of medicine. 12 test tubes are neatly arranged on the shelves, with dates written on the labels in marker, ranging from 20. The one at the bottom is particularly eye-catching, with the label S2023 Sipilwin. November 1st is Selena's birthday. "Stop looking." Lucas's voice was like thunder. He rushed over to close the cabinet door, and I moved sideways to block him. The back of his hand hit the rusty cabinet edge, and he gasped in pain. "This is Hawke family property." He pulled his tie. His face flushed. "You have no right to." "I have the right." Anna flashed out from behind him, holding a camera. The screen showed a close-up of the refrigerator. "I started taking pictures from the moment you locked the door." She clicked the transfer button. "It has been uploaded to the cloud. There are 3 backups." She tilted her head and smiled. "Photographer Zhao's lens is not only for shooting weddings." Lucas dug his nails into his palms, and when he turned around, the corner of his suit knocked off half a box of screws, which rolled all over the floor with a clanking sound. When the test report came out, I was squatting in the corner of the banquet hall sticking notes. Victor slapped the document on my knee, and the pages rustled. "It matches the toxin in Selena's body exactly." I looked up. "It's not a spur-of-the-moment idea. It's an experiment," he finished for me. "Since 2018, she has been debugging the toxin every birthday. S2023-11-1 should be the final version." I fished out the photo Isabel had given me. A woman in a white coat holds a little girl in a tutu, and the label "Neurotoxin Research" is still on the glass case in the background. The words on the back were so creepy that I touched them. "Mom, I will complete your experiment." The laboratory was very quiet late at night, with only the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in front of the test tube of S2023-11, and the coldness of the glass seeped through my gloves. The notepad was spread out on the operating table, and the last page read, "She is not crazy. She is a warrior." The snow outside the window was falling heavily again, and it made a rustling sound as it hit the glass. "Dr. Aiden," Robert's voice came from behind. I turned around and saw that he was holding a brown paper bag with old folds on the edges. Selena's personal doctor contacted me this morning. He handed me the paper bag. He said he had something to pass on to the investigators. When I took it, the pages in the bag rustled. The wind from the snowy night suddenly blew in, causing the pages of the notepad to flip, rustling. The handwriting on the last page was blurred by the wind, but it just happened to cover the previous line, the line I hadn't finished writing. The edges of Robert's brown paper bag were worn white. When I took it, my fingertips felt the creases, like calluses from the past. Selena's personal doctor said that the information should have been cremated with her. His Adam's apple moved, but he said, "Someone needs to see it." I squatted in front of the metal operating table in the laboratory, my knees against the cold surface. The cover of the medical record book is hardcover. When I turned to the last page, a yellowed piece of paper floated out. It was older than the medical record, and the corners were curled as if it had been repeatedly rubbed. Prescription pad. I bent down to pick it up, and just as my fingertips touched the corner of the paper, Isabel suddenly squatted down. The smell of her perfume mixed with the disinfectant in the laboratory was a bit choking. "I'll help you." We pinched the paper at the same time. Her nails were painted burgundy, the same shade Selena wore on her wedding day. The handwriting was written with a blue-black fountain pen, and the smudged ink looked like a faint cloud. The line "once a day before bedtime" was the clearest, and the illusion in relieve hallucinations, control emotions below, was missing half a stroke. The signature is Margaret Vaughan, and the last stroke of the signature is very long, like an unfinished sigh. Isabel's fingers were shaking. She pressed the paper to her chest, the broken diamonds on her necklace rustling the paper. She borrowed Margaret's old photo album from me last month. She sniffed. She said, "When I was a kid, I always watched my mother prepare medicine in the laboratory. It turns out I was drinking the same thing." I thought of Serena's graffiti on the attic wall. "They'll regret it." The writing was crooked, like a child's handwriting, but it was carved very deeply, and there were traces of cracks from the knife tip on the wood. "She's not crazy." Isabel suddenly looked up, tears falling on the prescription pad. She told me that Mom's experiment was originally intended to study the sequelae of mining accidents. The miners were always saying they saw blood in the mines, and Mom wanted to help them, but Dad thought it would hurt the company's stock price. The door of the laboratory was pushed open, and Graham leaned halfway in. He held a metal box in his hand, the lid of which was so rusty that it could scratch his hand. I found it in the wooden box at the back of the kitchen storage room. He placed the box in front of me. After Miss Margaret passed away, I wanted to throw it away every year when I cleaned the house, but I always felt that I should keep it. I opened the tin. There were a few clumps of dry brown powder lying inside, stained with a thin layer of dust from the bottom of the box. Graham came closer, his Adam's apple moving. Mrs. Margaret always said that aconitine must be extracted away from light. He pointed at the powder. "This color is the same as the sample in her laboratory back then." I took out my phone and pulled out the photo of the prescription I had taken earlier. The words "aconitine extract zeros" in the ingredient column were soaked in water, but were still recognizable. The powder in the iron box glowed with tiny golden spots under the cold white light of the phone, exactly the same as the residue on the wall of Selena's champagne glass. She planned it all from the beginning. I pinched the iron box, the metal hurting my palm. She used my mother's method to extract the toxin, used my mother's prescription pad as the password, and even her death was a will to my father. When Victor pushed the door open, I was spreading all the clues out on the workbench. Test tube labels, photos, prescription pads, tin boxes. His police boots made a dull sound as they stepped on the ground. The medical examiner said that Serena's medical record indicated advanced pancreatic cancer. He pointed to the prescription. "Does it have anything to do with this?" She knew she wouldn't live long. I pushed the prescription to him. After Edward stopped Margaret's experiment, no one cared about the miner's hallucinations. Selina checked the old files of her father's company. There was a mining accident 3 years ago that killed 17 people, and the official report said operational error. My throat is tight, but the miner's family said that before they died, they all shouted, "I saw blood in the mine." Victor's finger paused on the line that said, "Relieve hallucinations." When he looked up, there seemed to be a fire in his eyes. So she used Accompany to fake homicide and forced us to investigate further. The motives of those suspects were all smoke screens she deliberately put up. And Liam swapped the glasses. I remembered that Liam kept touching his pockets at the wedding. He must have been trying to confirm the money laundering evidence in his phone. Selina's champagne glass was coated with poison on the inside, and it was meant for Edward to drink. But Liam changed the cup temporarily. That's why she smiled when she cut the champagne tower. Isabel suddenly interrupted, wiping her face. When I was adjusting her veil, she whispered in my ear, "Finally he can hear the cries of the mines." Graham sighed and reached out to touch the iron box. Before Mrs. Margaret died, she gave this box to me. She said, "If the daughter of the Vaughan family comes to ask one day, you give this to her." He looked up at me and said, "Now I understand she is not waiting for a question, but for inheritance." The snow outside the window was falling heavier and heavier, making a rustling sound as it hit the glass. Victor carefully folded the prescription and put it in the evidence bag. "I will hand these over to the prosecutor, along with the mining accident files." He paused. "Selina's death will be the most powerful evidence." I took out my notepad and found half a line of words unfinished on the last page. I tucked the prescription pad in, paused the tip of my pen on the paper, and wrote, "She's not crazy. She's a warrior." At 3 o'clock in the morning, I stood at the gate of the manor with my suitcase. The snow has no heels, and it makes a squeaking sound when you step on it. The Hawk Manor behind him was like a silent castle in the snow, and the light was still on in the small window in the attic. It was Anna. She should still be sorting out the wedding videos. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Victor. "The relatives of the people in the mine disaster will come tomorrow to review the autopsy report." I replied, "Okay," and put the phone back in my pocket. The wind blew snow particles onto my face, but I felt it was warmer than the air conditioning in the laboratory. When I turned around, the notepad was pressing against my chest in my coat pocket. There are Selina's secret, Margaret's regret, and the unspoken grievances of 17 miners. The snow is still falling. I walked forward on the snow, and my boot prints formed a line behind me. The wind rustled the pages of the notepad, and the words on the last page were blurred by the snow and water, making them clearer. She is a warrior. That's the end of tonight's story. Thank you for listening. Have a good sleep. Good night, dear wanderer.